I think I see Mr. Atherton in the attendee list. I don't know if he needs to be promoted.
Okay. Yeah, I see him. I think he's promoted now. Thank you. Good morning, Will.
Yeah, good morning. I don't know what happened when I logged in. It made me register for the meeting, which was odd. So thank you, Dr. Keeling, for seeing me there.
Okay, that's great. And it is just now 9 o'clock, and we have a full agenda as usual. I think we couldn't have enough hours in our community engagement meetings, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome, everybody. It's good to see you this morning. Thank you for making the time to be here. This is our Community Engagement Committee meeting, and community engagement is one of Orange County School District's 4 priorities with equity overall. This committee meeting functions as a place for planning how we as a board can succeed in engaging our Orange County Schools community, but this meeting also serves to be a safe space for hearing where we have been weak or inadequate in these efforts. We must hold a safe space for conversations regarding racism or other community burdens. These can be tough conversations. Therefore, I'd like to remind myself and fellow board members to sit with or acknowledge uncomfortable moments as they present themselves, and to avoid making dismissive comments of the feedback we receive. And with that, I'd like to open the meeting, and our first item is to approve the April minutes. Did you have a chance to review those, Will? Okay, great. I'll take a motion to approve. Okay, I can see your mouth. I can't hear you, but I guess I motion to approve, and I'll second that motion. And all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Okay, and then I will pass the mic to Dr. Keeling, who will lead us in an anti-racism reflection exercise, and she had sent out pre-work for our board members. Good morning, Dr. Keeling.
Good morning, and I am going to attempt to share my screen. Grace, that's all I can ask for. It's very tricky. Mr. Jones, is there a way for me to be able to see what I'm presenting, but to also be able to look at another screen?
Yeah, if you have 2 screens, you should be able to do that with your display management.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Dr. Keeling. I just got a message from Dr. Felder that said she and some staff don't have access to the meeting. And she says they're working on it, but please proceed without us. But I just wanted to mention that it looks maybe like other people are trying to join.
I just sent
Not
them
sure.
invites. I just resent that.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Okay. And I am actually, I'm gonna ask Ms. Doyle, can I email you this? Because I don't have 2 screens. I only have 1, so it's hard for me to see and to be able to see everyone. So,
And then you want me to share?
yeah, could you do that?
Sure. Yep.
Thank you. Let me do that right quick. It may also give people a quick chance to get in as well. Okay. Just sent it to you, Ms. Doyle. Did it come through? Did it send?
I'm trying to see where it says to share. I think I need to open it first. Yeah. Okay.
That's it. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So as always, or if I haven't done it, please remind me, because we should be of the habit of always opening up with our courageous conversation protocol. And so to quickly go over our agreements, we agree to stay engaged. It is often difficult when we have conversations about race, equity. It's difficult. People want to disengage, and we want to find that point where we disengage, and we want to bring ourselves back in. And then we want to reflect on, why did I just disengage in that moment? We want to speak our truth. Sometimes, well, often, people of color are not believed for their truth. And so we want to create a platform where people feel like they can speak their truths and they can say that safely, even if it is not your experience, it is theirs. And so we create a space for people to be able to speak that. Experience discomfort. So again, it can be uncomfortable to have these conversations, but we don't want to walk away from that discomfort. We want to dig into it, and we want to understand, why is it that I'm so uncomfortable in this moment? And it becomes that reflection point for us. And then we want to expect and accept non-closure. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out of this overnight. We're not going to have equity tomorrow. It is a constant process. No one can say, oh, I'm equity, like I'm anti-racist, or, it is a continual process for us to work on. So those are our agreements. Before we move on to the next slide, you all had some pre-work, and I do want to pause to see if anyone wanted to reflect or to say anything about the pre-work. In your pre-work, you had some articles that talked about detouring and how to recognize microaggressions. Today, Ms. Stewart is going to be talking about some what could be some difficult information to hear. There's some talk around slavery, and sterilization is a number of things that can be uncomfortable. So I wanted Ms. Doyle and I, when we were talking and reflecting, wanted people to be very conscious of what we are getting ready to have a conversation about, and to be aware that discrimination, racism, doesn't necessarily take these very blatant forms anymore. There are still people who make blatant comments, but more often than not, it is those subtle things that are said, that are done, those subtle interactions that occur every day, throughout the day, that are harmful and that are what contribute to that racial trauma. It is not this one-time event like, oh, there was slavery and now it's over. It is the continual little comments. And so I wanted to give you some articles to be aware of the comments that are made, the interactions, and the effects that they have on people of color, LGBTQ plus, like anyone who's on the receiving end of that. And then there was a video that you watched about someone who was experiencing that racial trauma, what that felt like. And then there was an article of what not to say. So I want to pause and see if anyone who engaged in the pre-work had anything that they wanted to say about it.
I'll just say that the microaggressions, is very enlightening about the perspectives, right? And different races and how it's perceived, and things that people could say very innocently, like, where are you from? How that comes across to a certain person when the intentions aren't that, but keeping the other person's perspective in mind and showing empathy as you have those conversations. So I definitely thought the microaggression section was very enlightening and very, very much need of reflection of, how people interact and, what are the intentions, how are people perceiving and actually hearing what other people say. So I'll just say that was very enlightening for me.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah,
Atkins.
that was a really good comprehensive list with lots of specific examples, like Will said, and to just take the time to practice the empathy in the moment. I think one thing I'm coming to terms with as a white person is, I guess you could say being raised to be quick to speak, and so it's like taking the time to wait and think. So there are definitely things in there. From the detour one, it was phrased as like detours to avoid engaging with more topics around racism. And some of these I can, they're almost a little bit of stages you pass through as someone who's trying to learn and engage with studying racism myself. So, like, for example, the colorblindness theory, I'm colorblind. That was kind of a long time ago for me. I do feel like that was almost a value that a lot of, speaking for myself, white people are raised with, that, the goal is to be colorblind. And so that just doesn't really work. But that was an older one for me. One of the newer ones I can still see in myself. I've definitely engaged in some paternalistic, the idea of like thinking what's best for someone, paternalistic behavior, or distancing, now that I'm studying all, anti-racist books and things like that, wanting to distance myself from a white person who's engaging in some really harmful behavior or ignorant behavior. And so sitting with that and not trying to distance myself and pat myself on the back or thinking I'm in a different place. So those types of things that they identified I thought were really helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Doyle. Anyone else want to share?
I have so someone who I really, really love was just released from a psychiatric facility. And so, and there's a question about how to embrace that and how to embrace that in a way that's safe for her. And I realize that it's bringing up a host of biases that I have about people who have been incarcerated, for mental health. So there's that. How do you, it's not a microaggression necessarily, but it's definitely a bias. And there's a question about what's safe for her, what's safe for allowing her to be with other children, all that.
Thank you, Ms. Doyle and Ms. Hauser. Anyone else want to speak? Okay, so one of the things I want to say, I'm going to send you all as part of your weekly update, the agreements that are here. And there's also some additional agreements to that. They're called READY agreements. And one of those is intent versus impact. And Mr. Atherton brought up like people like, I just wouldn't even have thought that would like be offensive. That so was not like my intent. And I get it, particularly the one around like, where are you from? Because being from New York, it's not offensive to ask someone, where are you from? Like, because we're all from so many different places. And it was like, oh, I'm from Cuba. I'm from Sicily. I'm from Jamaica. I literally that up was like, those were my friends. Those are all the places that we were from. But like to that point though, it's like intent versus impact. So we don't intend to offend, we don't intend to cause harm, but sometimes the things we say still have that impact. And so like, and it's being more aware, and it can be difficult, right? Because you so didn't mean, and it's like, I didn't even know. But if Ms. Doyle, if you would go to the next slide, I think this will also help with that. So sometimes we spend time in our opening in reflection. Today, we're going to spend our opening in like a skill builder. So today's opening is how to listen. And you've already touched on the first one, being empathetic. So see, you guys you're good. You're already on the first step there. So it's always vulnerable. It's a vulnerable place when someone is sharing their story, right? Whenever you're opening yourself up, it made me think about Ms. Hauser and the story that she was telling, like about her mom, and just for me, like thinking there is a vulnerability to that because you're opening yourself up to people, right? And so we want to be very mindful of that, particularly when people are telling stories about harm, and we want to be aware of how that racial trauma shows up for them and its effects on them. And so your pre-work was on what you should not do, what your response shouldn't be. And today we're going to talk about what the response should be. And that response is to listen. And one of the consistent themes that we heard as part of our landscape analysis, which we will be presenting at a later time, was that families and communities of color did not feel heard. They do not feel that people are listening to them in the districts. And there is a difference between creating a platform for voice and saying, oh, well, we let people in and they can talk. And it's a difference between that and actually being heard. And so today we want to talk about, what does it mean to know how to listen? And so that first step is to empathize, as you all said. And I know that you're aware that sympathy means feeling sorry for someone. Empathy means to feel with someone. So for me, empathy is like genuine regard. There's a selflessness to it. It's not, I'm so focused on me. It's that I'm in this with you. Even if what you're feeling is not what is my experience, I have to remove myself from that and understand what it is that you're feeling. So the response is not, oh, if I was in that situation, this is how I would respond, or this is how I would have responded. Instead, it's, what do you need? It's being present with that person and what they're feeling. It's believing them, even when it isn't something that we've experienced, even when it isn't our reality, even when it feels like it is beyond reality. I can't even imagine that that's happening. Like, that can't possibly be right? That is the opposite of empathy. Empathy is really a heart response. And so one of the things that I would suggest as you're building your skill around empathy is to do like some mindfulness exercises, because it really begins to force you to be present in that situation. And instead of like going into your head and trying to find that answer, it is, I'm just going to be here with you and listen to what you're saying to me. So the next one is to reflect back what you heard and ask if you heard it correctly. So what I heard you say was, and then did I understand you correctly? And so when someone is saying something that's uncomfortable, the response is often to tune them out, to get defensive, to flip it and make it about them, as opposed to listening to what they're saying because you don't want to hear that, right? And it's hard to listen to racial trauma. And it's hard to listen if we've had some part of that. It's hard to like deal with that. And so in this response, you want to listen to what the person is saying, and you want to actively listen by reflecting back what they just said to you. Don't try to think of what your next response is going to be. Just have yourself be present in that moment and say, so what I heard you say was. And then you want to give them the chance by asking them, did I understand you correctly? So you may not have heard them correctly, right? So you want to be able to ask them, did I hear you correctly? And it's not only beneficial for that person that you're listening to, but it's also beneficial for you. Because when we feel uncomfortable, when we get defensive, then we start to form in our minds like what we're going to say, right? And then in that, we miss what the person is actually saying. We miss key parts of what they're saying. And if we know that we're going to have to reflect back to that person, for lack of a better word, it forces us to listen to them. And that's where you have to get to. Until you build the skill where you are just always actively listening, you have to take yourself through that of forcing yourself to listen by knowing I'm going to have to say back to them. So what I heard you say was. The next one is the 24 to 48 hour rule. And when you see the ready agreements, you will see this as one of the rules or one of the agreements in the ready agreements. So the 24 to 48 hour rule is when someone is opening themselves up and you've reflected back to them, you don't have to rush to a response. Ms. Doyle said, it's like one of the things that we learned is like you have to have something to say. And you don't have to. You don't have to rush to response. So, and it goes back to that pre-work, right, of what not to say. So you don't want to rush and say something that you really should not have said. Instead, we recognize that we may need to reflect on what we just heard. And so you can take 24 to 48 hours to process everything. But the key to that is that within that 24 to 48 hours, you have to get back to that person. So that's how we know, that's how that person knows that they have been heard, because you come back to them and you come back to them with a thoughtful response. And so here again, there's this level of accountability for ourselves. It's helping us to build that skill. So now we've built the skill of forcing ourselves to listen by reflecting back what that person said. And now we're building that skill of this accountability to go and do the self-work. One of the key things about equity and about becoming like anti-racist is to be doing that self-work. I engage in it all day, every day, throughout the day, like really reflecting on what did I just hear? What did I need to do differently in that? Like all of that is part of your self-work. So when you take that 24 to 48 hours to go and to reflect, so you're learning how to listen, you're learning how to get in the habit of doing that self-work and being reflective. And again, it's learning how to respond with your heart, right? It's tapping back into your humanity, because in that reflection, you're going inward. You're not staying up here in your head, you're going in. So the other side of that rule is how to listen and to respond when you've caused the harm. So today you may hear, and this isn't harm that you've caused, what Ms. Stewart is getting ready to talk to you about. But there are also times when you have caused harm, when we have caused harm, because I can cause harm myself. And within 24 to 48 hours of recognizing that you have caused harm, or of someone telling you that you have caused harm, if you're in an interaction with someone and they are telling you you're not listening to me, right? That is harm. We've just said that. So within 24 to 48 hours of someone saying that to you, or of you going and reflecting and saying, wow, I just asked that person, where are you from? And that may have been offensive to them. You need to go back and seek to repair that harm and to restore that relationship. So there's two parts to that 24 to 48 hours. There's the side of reflection. I didn't cause the harm, but it made me reflect on perhaps today with Miss Stewart within 24 to 48 hours, I'm going to contact Miss Stewart because there was something here that really stood out for me. Or the other side of it is I've caused harm. Someone just told me I caused harm. And within 24 to 48 hours, I need to repair that relationship. And then the last one is to act. And this is perhaps one of the biggest ways to show that you are listening to someone who has experienced harm, who you may have caused harm to, who is just experiencing this racial harm on a daily, these microaggressions, is to act. So you've listened, you've reflected, you've given this thoughtful response, you've taken the time to come back to the person and to either say that I need to repair our relationship, I need to restore a relationship, repair the harm. Now, the next thing you need to do is to act. And the best way for people to know that you are responsive to racial trauma is to change your behavior. Change the things you say, change the things you do, change the way we think. You know, remember racial trauma, microaggressions. You read that in your pre-work, and I talked about it. These are repeated acts. And so I will never know that you are listening to me if every time I interact with you, you are continually causing harm. Our community and our families never know that we are listening if they continually are saying, you're not listening, right? And so that tells them right there, we're not changing. So we have to show people that we are listening to what they are saying by acting. So we've learned about history and the mindsets that go along with that. In our first session, we watched the video, right? And I said, where did all those thoughts go? And the answer was they didn't go anywhere, right? They're still sitting here. And so they're embedded in our beliefs. They're embedded in our organizational processes, right? Everything that has led up to where Orange County Schools is today, where each of us is today, that's all part of our history, and all of that affects how we interact with people. It affects our organization. And so we have to not just change ourselves, but we have to work on changing our organization. You know, you all have made a commitment to equity and to breaking down walls and barriers. But for families who have been sitting in that for a long time, that's not what they know of Orange County Schools. So we have to act and show them this is how we're going to respond in a way other than we have responded before. So this is my last comment, and then I will open it up to any thoughts and then turn it over to Ms. Stewart. So I just read where someone said that the answer to challenges can be found in the communities where the challenge exists. So as you listen to Ms. Stewart today, listen for those themes that continue to play out for our students, for our staff, for our
Dr. Keeling, we're losing you just a little bit. Is that happening for you too?
I will pause.
Yes, it is.
There we go. We
Oh,
lost you
can
for
you
the
not
last
hear me?
minute there, Dr. Keeling. Just for that last minute when after you talked about, we heard you talk about, we've all made a commitment to equity and that the answers are found in the communities where the challenge is. And then right after that, it got a little bit.
Oh, okay, well, that actually was the end anyway. So that I just said I was pausing to see if you all had anything that you wanted to say before I turned it back over.
Can I ask a question? Is that okay?
Yes.
So this is all really helpful. For me, I sometimes think we're on a cultural collision course. which is a good thing, because it means that we're culturally engaged, we're interculturally engaging. And so I'm looking for, in terms of these comments, is what's the context for them? Because all of a sudden, as a community, we're starting to engage with people who don't look like us and who don't think like us. Sometimes we use the same words differently. Sometimes as we're listening, trigger words come up and it's like, oh no, that's not how I use that word. And all of a sudden, so it's kind of a boundary thing in a way, but I just am trying to say, how do these conversations, where do these conversations happen, and what's the process for us to be working on a goal together and saying, oh, you just stepped in my lane, and you may not have realized it, but you just stepped in my lane, get out, and be paid, so that kind of, I don't know how to say it differently. My favorite example is the word articulate,
That's really good, Ms. Hauser, because so the one thing I would say is, what is the context? It is every day. It is every interaction. This right here is a context, right? As I go through my day working, that's the context. Every time we speak with a family, every email we send, it is always the context. And what I also liked about what you just said there was to speak to this accountability to each other, right? So when someone says something, we have to create an environment where if you say something that triggers a harm within me, or that is a microaggression, that I feel safe to be able to tell you, wow, like that was just offensive. Like, and here's why that was offensive for me. So that's part of what the work is, right? Right now, everyone doesn't necessarily feel safe to call that out. And so that's how we stop the microaggressions, because they keep going on, because people don't always feel like when something is said that I can say that was inappropriate. The other side to that is that sometimes for the person who the harm has hit, they're affected and they can't say it because they're just affected. Like I don't know if you've ever like experienced a trauma, but when that thing comes up, like it can freeze you. I was just saying to principals yesterday that for me, like slavery is one of those things that freezes me. Like I can't watch the movie 12 Years a Slave. Like I still haven't seen that. I can't go back and watch Roots. There's a number of things because I can't deal with it. And so we have to hold each other accountable, because there should be someone else who, Ms. Doyle, for example, who speaks up and says to you, you know what, Ms. Hauser or Mr. Johnson, whoever it is, that was inappropriate for you to say that. And here's why. And even if Dr. Keeling couldn't say it to you, like I know that that's something that shouldn't be said, right? So that's what we have to get to as a culture. We have to get to the point where people feel safe to speak up. We have to get to the point where if that person is experiencing it and they can't say it for themselves, that someone else steps up and says it. And then we also have to get to the point of what we just said. Listening, receiving that, not being defensive and attacking that person, taking that, going and reflecting and coming back with it. Even if that reflection, to Mr. Atherton's point, was, I am sorry because I had no idea that what I just said would affect you like that. Like that was not my intent, but I recognize that it was harm nonetheless. Like even getting to that point is what the work is. I hope that answers your question.
That was very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you.
So if there's nothing, I will turn the floor back over to Ms. Doyle and Ms. Stewart. And again, I just thank you all for the time that you guys set aside to do this reflection. See, this is New York, right? I say you guys. That may be offensive to people. People may feel like, what? I'm not a guy. So I apologize if that's offensive. Thank you, though.
Thank you, Dr. Keeling. And I grew up in New Jersey, so I'm used to you guys too. I just started switching to y'all in my text after about 20 years. But anyway, Yeah, the one last thing I just wanted to say, it reminded me, and I liked your example of like kind of the group, you know, it needs to be, we need to have, it can't just be one person. We have to have a group ethic of holding each other accountable. And part of that too, you had touched on, it's not like I am anti-racist now. And for those of us who have read in Ibram X. Kendi's book, Stamped from the Beginning, he talks about it's like an everyday, like that was a racist comment I made. Not like I am racist because that, you know, the whole idea of that every day, we're inconsistent people, we're human beings, so we're not perfectly consistent all the time. So that if I am the person who's being called out in a certain moment, you know, when you neglected to say that, you know, Carrie, that really hurt because it felt like you were dismissing this thing, or, you know, it also needs to be okay that we've been corrected and that we're then giving each other the grace to go on and do a better job tomorrow or a better job in 20 minutes. And so some of that culture, I think, is not feeling like labeled for our mistakes. You know, the mistake itself identified, but accepting that we're all going to make them and that we're all undoing some messages we've lived with for a very long time. And so I just wanted to mention that from my perspective. So thank you so much for leading us through those how to listen exercises, Dr. Keeling. And I would like to invite Ms. Stewart to speak.
All right. Hi, everybody. Can everybody see me and hear me? Great. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I am so glad to be back here with you and just deeply appreciative of the steps that the school board is taking in regards to equity and in regards, in particular, to learning the history of this area. And that's my mission today. So I think what I will do in an effort to save bandwidth, my internet, I'm up here in Person County, as are a number of our staff around the district. So my internet is not very good, and turning off my video does help me with bandwidth. So I think I will turn off my camera. I will start sharing. So if you bear with me for 1 minute. All right, Ms. Doyle, can you tell me if you see the presentation now?
Yes, yes, I can see it. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Okay, and you can still hear me okay? Great, that is the intended effect. Okay. So today, my mission today is to give you the historical information, the historical context of this area, and then tie that to the educational impact. Really, when you understand the history, which Dr. Keeling referred to, when you understand the history, you can better understand the perspectives today, where people's actions are coming from, where their beliefs are coming from. And today, this is not history light for you today. This is history heavy. And Dr. Keeling did refer to that, but again, I really do think you deserve to know and need to know, because it is not apparently in the common learning, what has transpired over the last couple hundred of years, and then how that can relate to us in the business of education. So it is content rich today, and it may seem like I am talking very quickly. That's because I want to be sure to give you all the information for your understanding, but I do think processing it will be your brain's work for some weeks hereafter. Also, if I'm talking very quickly, you do have, or you will have, this slide deck to refer back to. If there are links that you want to click on because you're interested in knowing more, you can certainly go back and do that afterwards. If there are questions that you have, I invite you to jot down your questions and comments as we go. At the end of the slide deck is another slide with the same Padlet that is at the beginning of it. And you can enter your noticings and wonderings on that Padlet. And hopefully we'll also have time for Q&A at the end. We'll see how that goes. I will talk as fast as I can. So to get started, we have just a little summary I did for you about session 1. We did talk about the terms for Indigenous people. We talked about how tribes moved frequently. We talked about the North Carolina state recognized tribes and which are federally recognized. And I just want to pause for 1 second and give a little clarity to that. Federal recognition, full federal recognition means it comes with money, essentially. So that's what the Cherokee have. The Lumbee have limited federal recognition, which means they have that in name only. They do not get the funding with it. So those are our 2 tribes that are federally as well as state recognized. The rest of the tribes, the other 6, are state recognized only. We talked about the commonalities of the tribes. We talked about the Indian schools in North Carolina. And just to clarify on that point for a minute, the Lumbee and the Coharie, because of the way their legislation was worded and run through, they had what is called normal schools, Indian normal schools. And normal schools were training schools to train teachers from the tribes. So the Lumbee and the Coharie, they did have Native teachers. The Saponi did not. We were not allowed to have them. And I know from absolute experience, family experience, that these are the tribes. We are a tribe who was sent the lowest, the basest of the teachers. We did have one of our people, one of my dad's first cousins, Frank Epps. He left his home to go to Lumbee land to teach down there at the Indian Normal School down there. So he became a teacher, but he could not become a teacher for our people. So just to clarify that a little bit. And this was the Padlet that I had asked you if you had any wonderings or noticings to go ahead and click on that Padlet and enter your wonderings and noticings from that session. Thank you so much for those of you who did that. This is the same Padlet that is going to appear at the end of the slide deck. And you can also list your wonderings and noticings for session 2 on that. So this is taking a minute to load. What we're discussing today is how the historical climate, how that ties to the educational impact. This doesn't just apply to American Indians, Native Americans in North Carolina. It does, many parts of what you're going to see today apply to, it ties to African American populations, Latinx populations, if not directly in the specific content, then in analogous content. So in a way, we're using American Indians in North Carolina historical experience here to understand not just American Indians, but other groups as well. And I am not sure why this is not loading. It seems to be loading slowly. Okay, so we are going to be learning the history content. This is our path today, the content of the history, how that leads to who tells the history. This is something I'm going to be asking you to think about. Who tells the history? How does that lead to invisibility? How does that impact identity? How does it impact trust in our position in education? And then how do those things lead to academic achievement? So while we go through the slides today, you will see these symbols. And when you see that, your brain's work is to consider who writes the history, who gets to put forth their narrative. Also, what is untold? What is unsaid? What is unpublicized? Who knows it? Who doesn't know it? Why? So I won't necessarily dwell on those aspects of it, but if the symbols are there on the slide, that is a further thinking point for you. So to give you an example, let's go back to the cover slide, and let me just show you this quote on the cover slide again. So this quote, "Let us put our minds together and see what life we can make for our children." That was Tatanka Ayotake who said that. And in your notes, when you get the slide deck, there is a link to an article. And so let me go to that. In this quote, I will give you a minute to read that quote. You all are literate. I'm not going to read that for you. Go ahead and read that, please. So this is from that Smithsonian article that I linked in your notes. You'll notice that I do have the symbol up here, the green circle, who tells the history. So to just give you an example, when I was reading this, my thoughts were on these two sentences. The story she told me versus the books I was reading were very different. I focused on that because that was my experience in school. And then I also noticed the sentence that says there might be one history book with one paragraph about natives in it, and that's it. I focused on that because that is my history, both when I was in school, when my children were in school. So when I'm thinking about that, what I think about who tells the history is, but have you guys, I grew up in Pennsylvania, so I also say guys, have you guys historically been asked to name your group, or does the government do that? So I'm thinking about our tribe was named by the state Indians of Person County, just like the Lumbee were named the Indians of Robeson County. And I'm also thinking about, have you historically been allowed to name yourself? And in that, I'm thinking about the renaming of enslaved African Americans. I'm thinking about the renaming of Indian children in boarding schools. And I'm also thinking, but are the bones, skin, and hair of your grandparents and great-grandparents taken from your family and studied or put on display or held in academic areas, academic spaces? Because I've grown up just knowing that's what happens to my ancestors. So that's what I was wondering about who tells the history, just to give you a model of what I'm asking you to think about when you see those symbols. And then lastly, you'll notice this identity symbol in the bottom right corner. You'll see that and an invisibility marker. To me, that is me marking for you when these things have appeared and happened in historical events, so that you can begin to recognize them yourself in other events, so that you can apply this learning today to other groups and other events, whether they're contemporary or whether they are historical. So let's go ahead and begin the content and the fast talking. Buckle up, here it comes. Okay, so in session 1 on slide 41, the slide that I had the recommendations to you, I did tell you a little bit about medicine wheels. That was the slide about building relationships and building trust. So as I thought about what makes students successful academically, assuming we all define academic success as meeting or passing the benchmarks, which in itself is not exactly accurate, that we all define it that way, but for these purposes, that's what we'll use. I did realize that all the outward intentions and the actions, that they won't help if it doesn't impact how a student feels and what they truly believe deep in their hearts. And this relates directly back to what Dr. Keeling was saying about intention. So to me, a medicine wheel was the logical way for me to begin thinking about that. So this is the medicine wheel here that I came up with. And if we look at in the West, starting in the West, the Black, this is identity. This is what you believe about yourself. This is the West, the place of introspection, excuse me. So I believe I am valuable and I am capable. Kids have to have that to be academically successful. To the north, in the white, identity. This again, society. Do I believe that society values me and my people and believes that we are capable? It does make it very difficult to succeed if you know through everything that's happening in the world that society does not believe those things. Going to the right, to the east, this is the place that is pretty much saying, I believe in the system and the process of success in my society. So this is system-wide, like my learning in school has a purpose I believe in. Because if you don't believe in that system and the process of success, if you don't buy into the purpose for learning, again, you're going to struggle to be academically successful. And in the South, in red, my school instruction meets my needs and weaves in my culture throughout the day. This is validation. Does the system, do I feel validated by the system? And this is pretty much kids saying, I believe my schools are set up for my success. Yeah, they know me, they validate me, they want me to succeed, and they truly feel that. It's not just the outward intention. So this is my medicine wheel of the foundations for that success. So in historical climate, we are going to be going over these topics. Who were the enslaved people? What are the major trade routes from the colonies to the West Indies? That's a very important distinction. Issue cards, tribes' choice of location, voting rights, Dr. Plecker, Indian schools we've already talked about, and eugenics and forced sterilizations. And the questions you should be asking are, how does this history relate to today? What is the educational impact of this history? Because that's what we're all doing here. Additionally, you might want to expand it by thinking, well, hang on a minute. How would your people feel about the institution of schools if this was your people's history? And keep in mind, yes, these are specific to American Indians that I'm talking about, but analogous histories can be applied to other groups. So if it was your people, if this was your people's histories, would you buy into the system of school? Would you trust it? So those are things that you will be thinking in your heart and in your brain. So diving right into topic number 1, who are the enslaved people? Up in the top right, you see something that says, why isn't this taught in schools? I just want to say a disclaimer that I have not done a survey of Orange County Schools teachers, like K-12 teachers who teach history. These things were not taught to me. They were not taught to my children who came through Orange County Schools. It is not taught for the tribal youth that I know in my tribe and in other tribes who come through not Orange County Schools, but other districts. So all those things lead me to believe that it is not taught. However, just keep in mind my disclaimer that I have not surveyed social studies teachers in our district. So this is Linford D. Fisher, Associate Professor of History, Brown University, in 2017, saying between 2 and 5.5 million Native Americans were enslaved in the Americas, in addition to the 12.5 million African slaves. Native Americans could be sent to Caribbean plantations and face extremely harsh treatment far from their homes and communities. Fear of this fate spurred some Native Americans to pledge to fight to the death, while others surrendered, hoping to avoid being sent overseas. Native American enslavement was documented in colonial correspondence, shipping records, court cases, town records, colonial government orders, and petitions from the colonists to the British government. Even contemporary official histories of the war all point to the same thing. Indians were enslaved en masse and either distributed locally or sent overseas to a variety of destinations. The fact that so many people are not aware of this and boil this time period down to a black and white issue is why I have the invisibility stamp in the lower right corner. Again, looking at who were the enslaved people, going to Alan Galay's book, which is a fascinating book. It was published in 2009, so 12 years ago. It is a collection of research essays on the topic. And it's just this area. It is super interesting. And one of the essays points out the diversity of the slave experience. That is something, again, I was never taught, my children were never taught, kids I talk to from other tribes are not taught. And the diversity speaks to the many slave trades, the processes of enslavement, the variety in character, circumstance, purpose by which people became the slaves or captives, masters or slaves. So if we understand that, we can much more easily get into an accurate discussion. So he talks about the different legal rights in different colonies, varying ethnicities and cultures. He talks about, well, it's not even enough to say African people. Angolans are different than Bantu people. There was a group of each in South Carolina. Native people who were rounded up and enslaved from southern states and sent north to Boston and ended up grouping together as they ran away from that slavery because they knew there was an affinity there. New England Native people who were enslaved, there was even a difference there in the views of those people versus natives from the southern states. So all of that is to say, you know, this compels us to rethink the whole colonies and regions' histories. There certainly were, according to Galay, directives and laws that barred or limited this Indian enslavement, but those laws were very porous. They did not enforce them. So there was widespread and illicit abuse of Indian labor. He goes on to say that the economic systems set up by the Spanish and the British, they profited greatly by indigenous labor. Within the European colonies where natives lived under difficult circumstances, they could be enslaved through a variety of means. Mission Indians in Florida, the Southwest, elsewhere in the Spanish Empire often were forced to work against their will with little or no monetary compensation. In New England, courts forced Native Americans found guilty of minor crimes into a lifetime of servitude. Natives could also be enslaved for debt or reclassified as Africans and enslaved in places where Indian slavery had become illegal and was more highly enforced, which generally it was not enforced. It was not unusual for friendly Indians to the colonizers to be kidnapped and sold into slavery. So many of these Indians that were captured were shipped to the West Indies to work as African labor, agricultural laborers with African enslaved people. So the reason, well, one of the reasons the whole savages thing came about is by later, the early 18th century, the colonizers had kind of given up hopes of assimilating Native people through slavery. And they thought that we were irredeemable savages. It was clear that most natives did not want to assimilate, especially under the colonizers' terms. So that's where that whole aspect started, as well as the boarding schools in Fort Christiana, which I mentioned in session 1 as the precursor to the boarding schools. Being sent to the West Indies was viewed as a punishment. You were sent there, it was much harder labor. There were more deaths because it was much harder labor, much harsher. And for a Native person to be taken from their home and from their tribe, that was extremely traumatic. That is against everything that Native cultures believe in. So, let me go back one. This slide. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you. I won't dwell on it. This is here to answer people who may have questions that start with, but Indian people, enslaved people too. So if that is a question that you have or that you're pondering, please feel free to go back to that slide and read that in full, or even get the Galay book. And there's many places in that address that. So what we're going to talk about now is going back 1702, who was here? So these are all the countries, the European countries who were in the Americas in 1702, which is as far back as I could find this information in K-12 curriculum-based searches. And we can see our colonies here on the East Coast. This is the slave trade routes. This is what I found over and over and over and over again while searching for maps to show you. This model comes up almost exclusively, and it is correlated to schools, correlating to the teaching of this time period. It's common, this is the commonly taught model with varying degrees of complexity. They call it the triangle trade route, the triangle trade, where the sugar tobacco come from the Americas. You know, slaves were used to grow that. They send it to Europe. Europe sends textiles to the Americas, and then slaves are sent from Africa. You know, so we know now, we have known for many years that that is not accurate, and it leaves out a large piece of information that I just showed you through Gallet and the other research. It leaves out that large piece of information, and it leaves out a large piece of human experience. This was a map that took me forever to find using K-12 curriculum research questioning methods. And it only partially acknowledges, you'll see this arrow coming from Norfolk down, and it does admit, whoop, yep, we did send some people down south there. So in the purple skinny arrow here, you will see this. And again, this is 1850, so this is relatively late. So the fact that I had such difficulty finding this, the fact that it is relatively late, that should all get you thinking of our green symbols there, who tells the history. And we can overlay maps here. So let me go ahead and do that for you. This is a blow up of the previous 1702 maps where you see our colonies. And again, with the difficulty finding accurate maps that accurately portray the history that we know happened, you know, we don't even see them being shipped down. Boston was a big area that shipped down to the West Indies to round people up and ship them down there. And, you know, they sold the people. That's how they made their money, and shipped them to the West Indies. So they would get pretty good money for that. So that's the sugar slave trade route. If we go to our next history content area, the tribe's choice of location, this is the same map that I showed you in session 1. It's just a little different, and then it has the population on there, but this is showing you the tribes in color, and it's giving a rough approximation of population, but this is several years old, so that's not current. And I did overlay the 4 Indian urban organizations here with white to blot them out, because I just wanted to look at the tribes and the tribes' locations for this thing that I just wanted to think about. If we overlay the geographical regions of North Carolina, the geographical features of North Carolina with the tribes, we can look up here to the northeast. This is the Meherrin tribe up here, and then the Hollowa. You can see, well, it's a little hard to see, but this is the Great Dismal Swamp. This has been written, it's still called the Great Dismal Swamp. This was first written about in the 1700s. Many firsthand accounts with the Great Dismal Swamp, and it was dismal. Looking down in the south, the very southern point, that's another swamp, and that's right at the Coharie and Waccamaw, where they live, more swampland there. I think it's called Green Swamp, but I'm not sure about that. Don't quote me on that. If we go out to the west, of course, we've got the Cherokee, and here we have the mountains. If we go north in Person County, we have my tribe, the Saponi. It is very hilly. It is very isolated. There are not a lot of roads. It is isolated. So we want to be questioning, why are tribes choosing these areas that are so disadvantageous as far as, you know, growing crops and making money. Why would they choose to live there? So if all the things about slavery were going on with your people, wouldn't your people maybe choose to become invisible? Wouldn't they choose to be away from the centers that have become occupied by the colonizers and the people that have enslaved them? Invisibility again. And then going on kind of a different take on the tribe's choice of location, my Saponi Tribal Center is located in Christie, in what's now known as Virginia, in the Mayo Lake area. And Mayo Lake was created by dam impoundment of Mayo Creek. What I know about that, what all the Saponi know about that, is that Mayo Reservoir was man-made. It was made because CP&L needed a power source in the 70s. It had been a large part of the Saponi community. At least 10 homes, 2 graveyards were on that. One of the old family burial grounds were so old there were no coffins or boxes. So when we were told that it was going to be impounded, all they could do was scoop up some of the dirt from that cemetery to rebury at the location they were then given instead of our previous location. We were not in favor of trading our land to CP&L and this land being flooded to form Mayo Lake, but we were forced by the courts. One of my cousins, Melvin Stewart, went to the court to keep his home and he was refused. CP&L had made certain promises. They were never held. And this was the 70s. I went to try and find more information on this, and this is the only thing I found. This is an article that talks about, this is like a lake lovers article, and I gave you the link in the notes. So this only points out that Carolina Light and Power needed the cooling water for a coal plant. They built an earthen dam on Mayo Creek in the river basin. It talks about, you know, the shoreline. It goes down in the next paragraph to talk about the habitat and all the wildlife there. And then it goes down in the last couple paragraphs to talk about all the interesting things that there are to do in this area, the historic buildings. And the only thing it says about Native Americans is there's some permanent exhibits in the Person County Museum, and it does have an African history room and a Native American room. Does not even do us the courtesy of saying it's Saponi. It's the Saponi room, and darn it, I helped set that room up. So, you know, again, complete erasure. Looking at another aspect of the location and the erosion of even that choice in tribes. I don't know if you all are aware of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline that was canceled last summer. If we look down at the proposed pipeline, look down at these counties, we can see clearly that this is the Halifax and Warren counties. This is the Halawa tribe right here. Here's our Great Dismal Swamp where the Meherrin are. It goes right down into Waccamaw, Coharie, Lumbee land. It goes down into all through of these counties, and this would have environmentally affected through fracking all of these native homes that they chose, in a way, chose. Ryan Emanuel, who's I believe he's a professor of environmental sciences, but he is at NC State. He's just finishing up his sabbatical. He is a Lumbee. He vocally opposed vigorously this pipeline for all of the native tribes. Other tribal leaders spoke up. Young native people spoke up. And it was defeated. But if you look down here at this cute little guy in the bottom left, this is a cow knob salamander. He is the reason that this pipeline was eventually defeated. There were anti-fracking organizations that were not a part of Native organizations, and they too were opposed, but eventually this little guy, the cow knob salamander, is the one that got that defeated, because this little guy is only found in the mountains of Virginia, kind of southwestern Virginia. and the pipeline would have had to add a relatively small portion to avoid that area where the salamander is. But that cost of going around the salamanders, that was considered prohibitive to making the pipeline. So salamander is greater than all these native people. So moving on to another historical content topic, issue cards. You probably have seen, probably familiar with these. These are sometimes, well, I guess they're most usually called free papers for African American people. They are the written proof that a person is free, they are not enslaved. So most usually they include some sort of physical description of the person, kind of distinctive markers for verification. So if you were traveling during that time or out and about and you were stopped and questioned, what are you doing here? Or you thought to be a runaway slave, you could prove that you were allowed to be there if you had your issue card, your free papers with you. So people did carry them. It was necessary to carry them. It was your proof. It might keep you from being captured again and sold and enslaved again. So what is generally not always known, when we keep things simplified to the African and white context, it is not always known that Native people also had issue cards. It was kind of an insult or a slur to call a person an issue. Old Ishi in Granville County, among Granville County groups of Native people, that referred to you were freeborn Indian. New Ishi referred to you were freed, but you had previously been enslaved. That could be because your parent was enslaved. Slavery was inheritable. So American Indians have always had this term of issue or free issue, or calling person, well, you're just new Ishi. So Sally Stewart, this is from the Halifax County, Virginia courthouse. She is one of mine. She's one of our people, is a pony. And you can see here, she is described, this is her issue card. She was 17. It tells she was in the household of William and Elizabeth Stewart. She was, and down at the bottom, you see her physical description. So this, this is validation for whoever is checking her papers. She should be of bright complexion, 5'5", has a scar on her upper lip, and she was born free. So reasons to enslave people could be, oh, you do not have your papers. Now, whether that means you are not carrying them with you, or you don't have them, or somebody took them and ripped them up, in either case, you don't have papers. It could be a minor infraction, could be debt, could be your parent is enslaved, could be that you have no white benefactor to vouch for you. So colonial laws also made that it was illegal to testify against a white person in court. So let's say you were rounded up and you were free. You could not testify against the person who enslaved you in court. You couldn't be there, you couldn't present evidence against a white person. So you had to have a white benefactor do that for you. So if you don't have one, you're out of luck. You could be falsely reported as a runaway slave. And of course, you could be abducted for money. West Indies always needed more slaves. There was an earlier death rate there. So please don't forget our markers of what your brain is supposed to be thinking about. Another thing you may not be aware of is that Native people are the only group that still carries cards. We are the only group who still has to prove that we belong to that group in order to gain access to things. The cards have been developed, modified since then. They've morphed. Cards are now issued by the tribes. What you're looking at is my old tribal card. I have blocked out my tribal number. That's like gold. My enrollment number. On the back, new cards that we are issuing include your name, your address, the signatures of our tribal government. They can be used as valid ID, just like a driver's license or a passport. I was showing my dad this presentation before while I was developing it. And when I got to this slide, my dad said, I have mine here somewhere. He was visiting up at my house. He pulled out his wallet, and man, it took him like 10 minutes, but don't you know that thing was slammed in there somewhere. He has an old card also. This is our identity. This is a funny thing. It has become, and this is my Saponi symbol, obviously, this has become sometimes a point of pride, sometimes a point of anger. So on to voting rights. Snyder Act of 1924, Native Americans born in the US to full US citizenship. There you go, you're citizens now in 1924. However, let me just say, I was not born in the United States. My dad was in the Army. He was stationed at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. That's where I was born. So I'm still Native. I'm still enrolled. Just because I was born in the Philippines doesn't mean I'm not Native. So, but according to 1924, I would have been. So 1870, all US citizens were granted the right to vote regardless of race. But we know that was also very porous. 1924 said, okay, natives, you are now citizens. It still took over 40 years after that for all 50 states to allow Native Americans to vote. So then in 1948, there was that whole thing with the state constitution in Arizona, keeping Indians from voting. So even with the lawful right to vote in every state, Native Americans had the same things in place as other groups did. Poll taxes, literacy tests, frauds, intimidations, same thing. So in 1965, the Voting Rights passed, and the act and legislation in 1970, 1975, 1982, those voting protections were reaffirmed and strengthened. So when you're thinking about it, some Native people might not have been able to vote until 1982. People, that's ludicrous. So now on to the next topic. Walter Plecker. This is a big, huge topic. It is very heavy. He was a physician, a eugenicist, avowed white supremacist. He stated that freely. He was proud of it. He declared it. He was a member of the Anglo-Saxon Clubs of America. And he was appointed registrar of Virginia's Bureau of Vital Statistics in 1912. He ran that bureau for over 34 years. Remember, please, that we also are realizing that all of the tribes moved back and forth in area. So the Saponi, the Occaneechi, the Meherrin, Ahalawa, back and forth from Virginia to North Carolina frequently, not just in the 1700s. So his goal was to ban the race mixing. He saw Indian identity as dangerous. He believed it would simply be used as a way station for people who just wanted to be classified as white. And there were many reasons that white classification in Virginia was beneficial. Better homes, better schools, freedom. He said that he declared in his official capacity that there were no Indians left in Virginia due to marrying African Americans. He was a champion of that legislation that codified the concept that people with one drop of Negro blood could not be classified white. He led the charge to pass that Racial Integrity Act of 1924, which criminalized interracial marriage and required that every birth in the state be recorded by race, with the only options being white and colored. He said the Racial Integrity Act, was the most perfect expression of the white ideal and the most important eugenical effort that has been made in 4,000 years. This erased any acknowledgement of Indians and began complete and legal, practical elimination of identity of Virginia's tribes. Not just the Saponi, but the other ones I just mentioned. So Plecker did direct registrars around the entire state, because remember, he was the head of all of them, to change birth certificates to cross out Indian and write in colored. He had Indian children removed from white schools, Indian patients removed from white hospitals. He pushed back against Native Americans who tried to maintain their tribal identity. He rejected federal efforts to acknowledge the existence of Indians in the state. So unpacking and processing that just for a second, federal government was attempting to acknowledge the existence of Indians in Virginia. He controlled that. Top right is a picture of a typical birth certificate at that moment. This is exactly the birth certificate that my father and his brother and sisters have, as do most of that generation. Dad said that it was typed in, and then after a visit to his doctor, Indian was crossed out and mixed was handwritten in. You can find examples of that online. I've tried to give you all the links to do that in the notes. So the way that affects tribes today, the Pamunkey, a Virginia tribe, in 2016, they were the first Virginia tribe to receive federal recognition. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, they require that tribes prove that they have consistently identified as American Indian since 1900. So Plecker obviously took that away because they could not identify as that. So since then, there have been other federally recognized tribes in Virginia: Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Upper Mattaponi, the Rappahannock, Nansemond, and Monacan, and that was after 2016. The impact of tribes on this was lasting and devastating. Separation of families. So some left Virginia because they were not willing to be classified otherwise. So they left to get married, to raise their family, and they never returned, and they separated from their culture. He also had influence far beyond Virginia. On the federal level, he lobbied the Census Bureau in 1930 to stop using the category mulatto to count mixed race citizens. So indicating that you were of more than one race was not allowed until the 2000 census. So that Racial Integrity Act that he was instrumental in getting passed, that was canceled out with the 1967 ruling in favor of that interracial Virginia couple, their right to marry in Loving versus Virginia. She was interestingly Rappahannock, and the man was white. She is presented as African American in almost everything I've ever seen, but she was Rappahannock. And also, my parents would definitely have been illegal, their marriage. Plecker also wrote a letter in January 1943. He wrote it to the registrars, physicians, health officers, nurses, school superintendents, clerks of courts through the entire state, with a list of surnames by county that he wanted them to report as groups of free issues. And if you, this is the letter I have linked for you, I think. And if you look down to Halifax County, Virginia, not North Carolina, these are my families. This is my tribe. This is all the Saponi names except Young. I'm not sure who they are. So this is, again, stripping identity. And one of the things he said in that letter in January 1943, some of these mongrels, these people are playing up the advantages gained by being permitted to give Indian as the race. And you can see these mongrels, and I explained to you in session 1 that one of those mongrels became a very successful superintendent of schools for Virginia and North Carolina. And my dad is the other little mongrel there. So he also wrote another letter in December of that same year, 1943, to the same people. Arrogant demands for recognition as Indians is what he thought we were making. Again, he's stating that the worst forms of undesirables born amongst us are those whose parents are of different races. So his entire life's work was to make sure there were no Native people. He retired in 1946. He remains an unknown figure, crazy enough, for all these huge things that I'm telling you. Why don't people know about him? So though the history of racism and Jim Crow is taught in Virginia schools, neither Plecker nor the Racial Integrity Act are mentioned, according to the Virginia Department of Education. much to the delight of many Native people. He retired very late, and a year after retiring, he was hit and killed by a car. Next topic is eugenics, which does actually tie to Plecker, because the Racial Integrity Act was just one pillar of the rest of what Plecker and the eugenicists created. They lobbied for the Eugenical Sterilization Act that was signed into law in 1924 in Virginia that allowed the state to sterilize individuals that they deemed, certain things were worthy of sterilization. Not repealed until 1974, but it was larger than just Virginia. So that whole philosophy was intentional and selective breeding of humans to rid the population of certain things. It was carried out by nonprofit organizations, state governments. It was carried out nationwide. So in North Carolina, between 1929 and 1974, nearly 7,600 documented, and again, look at your green circle, males and females were sterilized by choice, force, or coercion under the authority of the 1929 sterilization law and the creation of the North Carolina Eugenics Board in 1933. The youngest victims were 10. 85% of them were female. 40% of them were minorities, including African Americans and Native Americans. And this information is found on recent websites that the North Carolina Department of Administration has set up. There's an Office for Justice of Sterilization Victims. I've linked that in the notes for you. There is a Sterilization Victims Foundation. I've linked their brochure in the notes for you also. So the eugenics practice, that was definitely practiced in the Native tribes. It absolutely happened to Sakoney women. It absolutely was against their will. There were organizations, Procter & Gamble, Haynes, R.J. Reynolds, called the Human Betterment League is where they came together, and they phrased it as offering citizens protection in the form of selective sterilization. They dressed their spokespeople up like nurses and went into the community. They gave social workers and the ability to recommend who should be sterilized. And remember, who is the social workers? It's not the people from the communities. So they made it feel like you're doing the country a favor by protecting them from these negative elements. In other words, African Americans and Native Americans. So reasons that were given to forcibly sterilize, these might look familiar from a couple of slides ago. Minor infractions, major infractions, being a troublemaker, poverty. You were too poor to have kids, they thought. So the social worker would, send you your name in to be sterilized. If there are too many children in your family, if your mother's reported as loose, reported being the key word, if they judged that your intelligence is low, or your family member has been falsely reported as any of those things to a social worker, a teacher, a doctor, a health official, or if you have no white benefactor to vouch for you. So here's the map from the program, the Foundations program, the Sterilization Victims Foundation program. And this is the map of telling how many victims of sterilization there were. And what I did is overlay this map again. I added green dots, bright green dots, where there are the Indian tribes, not the urban organizations, but I added the Indian tribes that were in the bright green, you see it here, either recognized by the state of North Carolina or had formed their government by the time of that forced sterilization or within the span of that forced sterilization. So even within the span, if they had actively formed as a tribe, I put a dot there. And then I just listed, just for your information, so you know why I was putting the dots there. I listed the dates that North Carolina state recognition was granted to each tribe. For example, the Lumbee in 1885, and then the date that the tribal government was created. And then so I listed that, and that's easy enough to go back and find on each tribe's website. We already talked about the next historical event. We've talked about this a good deal in the first session. What I want to say further about that is that while here in this area, we didn't have what is commonly known as the Indian boarding schools. And, you know, the Indian boarding schools, their motto was kill the Indian, save the man, where assimilation and conversion, or either conversion or death, you know, you can't, you know, either you convert and assimilate or you die. So that's the goal. So while we didn't have that, we did have this setup, which I talked to you about before, you know, with the not going all the way through the grades, requiring the Indian communities to come up with the land, labor, building material, lack of funding and facilities, materials, basically a subpar education. So when you then add in Fort Christiana that I told you about, that was the precursor. The Occaneechi tribes were there, the Saponi tribes were there, the Halawa tribes were there. There were also like 5 other tribes there that are not in existence today. That was 1714 to 1718 in Southern Virginia. When you then add in the further history, 100 years before this history right here, when you add this in, where the tribal children were held hostage to the cooperation, to ensure that cooperation of the adults, I guess I want you to think about, what if this was the history of your people's schooling? Would you buy into what the school is selling? Would you trust the principals, the teachers? Would your family believe in the process, believe that the schools are there to help you? One really good book that I would definitely recommend is Beyond the Asterisk. And while it says, you know, the subtitle is Understanding Native Students in Higher Education, it does make a very particular point of talking about K-12 education as being the foundation for higher education. Unless we get kids successfully through K-12 education, we can't study them in higher education because they will not be there. They define invisibility as the intentional act of writing out the story of a particular group, which serves to maintain the status quo and benefits of the dominant group. And I do agree with that definition. So NCAI, and you see it linked here at the bottom, this is the National Congress of American Indians. They have a policy and research center. They are a huge source of information. NCAI is the Native national organization for Native Americans, and they were formed in the 40s. They are an advocacy and program organization. And so from a report from their Policy and Research Center, their point is invisibility. Other, I can't even tell you how many times my kids and I have checked other, because we are, you know, Native Americans are not listed as a choice on things, or the asterisk, because instead of data for us, there is an asterisk. So we continue to be invisible, to quote NCAI's Policy Research Center. There is an absence of data, absence of accurate media images, absence of historical and contemporary awareness about Native people in schools, healthcare facilities, professions, military service, and daily life. And what I want to say is, Orange County School Board and personnel, you are taking a step to fix that within ourselves. And I just could not be any prouder of you for that. So this invisibility down at the bottom, it is described as the asterisk nation, because instead of that data point, we are the asterisk. A modern form of the asterisk we saw in the COVID-19 reporting. And this I wanted to point out to you because I was intrigued where this paragraph is from that I'm quoting. This is Affinity Magazine. Affinity Magazine is a journalistic magazine for and by teens. So the writing is not perfect, but it's really relevant to what we are doing because this is our kids talking. This is not just Native kids. This is a lot of BIPOC kids. So what they have to say is it's an in-your-face truth that Native Americans are not commonly represented in America. So then they go on to point out the coronavirus outbreak data and how, and this is what was put out by Maryland. African American, Asian, white, Hispanic, other, data not available. So the other is us. And I can't even tell you, so here we go, serving up the maintaining status quo again. I can't even tell you how that went down in the North Carolina and national Indian community. Native people, to make a very broad generalization, deal with things with humor a lot of times. So that was turned into many, many memes on Facebook and on Twitter. This faux pas that Maryland said that, oh, sorry, we didn't realize we were supposed to also talk about Native Americans. So many memes were created from that. But yes, we also had serious conversations from that. Also from NCAI, this report of Reclaiming Your Truth Project and this report down here at the bottom, Becoming Visible, they are really good reports. The invisibility of Native peoples is pervasive and entrenched across all sectors of American society. It's not just us, it's not just Orange County schools, but you are the ones I know about who are taking steps to relieve that. This is recent data. This is a recent report. 72% of Americans rarely encounter or receive information about Native Americans. Education is one of the most powerful opinion shaping systems in America. You have a powerful charge. From the RNT research, K-12 education is a key driver of invisibility and false narratives about Native peoples for everyone. 87% of state history standards do not mention Native American history after 1900. 27 states make no mention of a single Native American in their K-12 curriculum. So what I want to point out about these percentages and this number 27, the 13% that does mention the Native American history, that is quantity. That is not quality, and it is not necessarily accuracy. Same is true of, you know, any statistics like that. And so again, to Affinity Magazine, considering the last slide through the eyes of the teenagers from Affinity magazines. Some Native American students have even surrendered to the standards perpetuated by the media and have purposely tried to mold themselves accordingly because to them, some representation is better than none. Others began to doubt their potential and self-esteem after watching these characters on the screen. An underlying nationalist view in American history education continues to create a discrepancy between the content minorities are taught and the perspective they grew up with, between what they are taught and what they know to be true. Oftentimes, this one-sided distribution of information has had negative emotional impacts on minorities. It can also contribute to the persistence of racial stigmatization, stereotypes, and ignorance to historical trauma. I am educating you about that historical trauma and holding you in trust to make it better in this district. In a UK study, this was very interesting and it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. in session 1. Students of African Caribbean descent actually had negative psychological responses to history lessons intended to promote inclusivity in the classroom and beyond. That content was primarily centered around their ancestors as victims and slaves. It generated discomfort and the sense of being alienated. This reaction was a result of microaggressions. Excuse me one second, let me turn that off. A result of microaggressions within the content taught. So you can teach the content and you can also teach the content with microaggressions. And it backs the understanding that much of the efforts being made to correct a lack of awareness are counterproductive or superficial. So we need to develop a plan not to fall into that trap. This I have used from permission from the UNC's American Indian Center presentation to Guilford County Board of Ed in 2017. On the left, those 6 rectangles you see, these are the drivers. On the right, you can see what it leads to. And they took this again from the book Beyond the Asterisk. So I'm just going to give you a minute to read over those. And I'm going to move on in the interest of time. I know I'm running long and I intended to be finished by now, so let me just speak even faster. It matters to everyone because most Americans do not have accurate information about either historical or contemporary lives of Native people in their state even. So people look to K-12 education experience to provide them with good information about Native peoples, but they didn't receive accurate information or no information at all when they attended K-12 school. So this lack of awareness and knowledge of contemporary Native Americans leads to misguided school policies and practices, impaired relationships, racism, discrimination, and that's a system thing. All students benefit from learning accurate information about Native Americans. And here's your source at the bottom. So we have in our path, we've talked about the history. I've asked you to think about who tells the history, and the invisibility, identity, and trust issues were pointed out for you so you could think about them. And so we are quickly going to cover academic achievement and its relationship. And again, I've marked who tells the history. So looking to the North Carolina findings from the 2020 SACE annual report, that's the State Advisory Council on Indian Education. These are 2018-19 data. That is because the State Advisory Council gives annual reports to the State Board of Education in April of every year. So when they give it in April, it has to be the previous year's data. So what we are looking at is EOG reading, American Indian students compared with white students. EOG math, second line, American Indians compared with white students. This is proficiency. EOC math, English, biology. At the bottom, we have 4-year cohort graduation rate comparisons with the 2 groups, and conversely, the dropout rate comparison. So let me just say something about this 81.2% and 89.6% very quickly. This has improved with a decade-long focus on this in Title VI LEAs. This is just Title VI LEA findings right here. So the Title VI LEAs, that's the Indian Education Act for North Carolina, and SACE, the State Advisory Council, they have called attention to it over the past decade. It did used to be the highest dropout rate for American Indians of any group in North Carolina, but they have focused on it and made strides with that over the last decade. I'm just going to briefly go over national. If you want to go into it further, all the slides and information is here. Just suffice it to say that it's what you would expect. Yeah, the past 10 years, they've been the only population to not have improved in reading or math. nationally, they face some of the lowest high school graduation rates, and fewer enroll in and graduate from college. And that's what we want. We want everybody not just to enroll in college, but we want them to graduate. Statistics reported, this is the NCAI again, statistics reported, they differ nationally from North Carolina, both because of national reporting having BIE schools, Bureau of Indian Education schools, and enrollment factors. It's also older data because the 2020 census is not yet released. The Bureau of Indian Affairs and BIE administers schools. Bureau of Indian Affairs is not in the business of granting federal recognition. They are in the business of withholding federal recognition. BIE schools, they many times look analogous to North Carolina Indian schools of old. So you can look at those national statistics, but I will just tell you it's what you would expect. In graduation rates, 2009, 13% of natives 16 to 24 were not enrolled in high school and have not earned high school credentials, compared to 8% of the total population. National graduation rates for high school students was 50.6% in 04-05 compared to 77.6% for white students. If you look at this bottom chart, the green line that I have put in there, that represents, to the right of that is people who have had some college or all college. To the left of that is less than high school or high school only. So you can see all United States citizens at the top, American Indian, Alaska Native at the bottom. So about a 10-point discrepancy. When we're talking about higher education, approximately 189,000 American Indians, Alaska Natives were enrolled at degree granting institutions, comprising 1% of the total undergraduate population. So our total population is about that. So that is about population-wise, a little less. But when you look at the percent that graduated, 38% completed their degree, compared to 60% of white students, 40% of Black students, 49% of Hispanic, and 67% of Asian Pacific Islanders. So just to revisit for a second, this, and to help you process for a second, when we go back to thinking about everything in education that I've just said, we go back to this model, we can't necessarily have complete control of the West, what a student believes in themselves. We can support it and we can make sure we don't erode it, microaggressions being one erosion factor, but we can't fully control it. Identity at the top in the North, we also can't necessarily control that. We can't control all of society. We can support the processing of it by our students. We can validate it. We can discuss it age appropriately. We can listen. We can facilitate that processing, but we can't control it all. Here's what we control. We control our system. So we can control if we have a system that students can believe in the purpose and the process. We can control if our system is set up for their success, all the students' success. So we can control those things. And then going back down. I'm sorry, y'all, I know you're like probably tired of hearing me. I'm trying to be fast. I'm trying to be fast, but I'm also trying to take advantage of this opportunity and just tell you, I want to tell you the real deal. So the takeaway is this. What educators do or do not do in K-12 strongly impacts whether Native students stay in high school, graduate from high school, apply to college, are accepted at college, stay in college, and graduate and leave with a degree. That's K-12, that's us. The K-12 foundation, this is our takeaway also. The foundation set in K-12, that's what makes the difference. It includes the teacher education. It includes visibility of contemporary, non-stereotypical American Indians, teaching that culturally responsive material, teacher awareness that there could be Native students in your class, but whether there are or not, everybody needs accurate information, and teacher awareness of tribes in the state. This model is a fantastic, this is a great starting point for all of those things. Another takeaway is that we need to recognize the disparity between our beliefs, which are often based in incomplete information and stereotypes. That's our theory. But there's a disparity between what we believe and the real lived lives of our students. We have to recognize that and reconcile with it and accept that what our students are saying is the truth. There must be a way for Native students to retain their authentic sense of self and an Indigenous identity while receiving an education. If they can't do that in K-12, they will really not want to do it in 13, 16, and certainly not graduate. So this was my recommendations, building relationships and building trust from session 1. And again, I just can't stress strongly enough this module. And here are my recommendations for today. Find out more about any of these specifics that interest you. Now that you know these specifics on the historical climate in North Carolina, decide what does that knowledge change in actual practice in our classrooms. What do you do with that information? What does this mean in terms of that new social studies position at the district level that Dr. Felder sent out the chart for? What does it mean in light of the fact that recently our State Department of Instruction took out specifically North Carolina Native Center language that the North Carolina State Advisory Council on Indian Education fought long and hard to have included in those standards in the early 90s. I think it was the early 90s. It was right before I came on to the State Advisory Council. My cousin Dorothy, one of the chiefs of our tribe, had fought long and hard with the Social Studies Department at DPI to have that language included, and so did other people on the State Advisory Council. That was taken out recently. So now that you know all this information, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to reconcile that with what DPI says is all teachers have to teach? And you know, they're pressed for time. I know teachers are pressed for time, and all they want to teach is reading and math because that is what is tested. So how do we reconcile with all of that? The next bullet point, giving teachers that strong foundation, the module is what I just highly recommend. Challenge yourself to continue to look beyond the asterisk. Know your resources. I've given a lot of them on each page of your slide deck. Having me share with you is really groundbreaking. I don't know that any other Board of Education has ever given Native people this much time. And then here are your resources. This video it's only about 6.5 minutes long. It's for you to watch on your own. It's a conversation with Natives on Race. This was actually created by a friend of mine, Brian Young, created it with another person. Brian is an amazing Diné, that would be Navajo to you. He's a graduate of Columbia and Harvard. He actually doesn't like the term American Indians, and he'll explain to you why in this video. So that is different than my experience that I told you about in session 1. He's also just come out with a middle grade novel, and I have to give him a plug because I read it and I'll be reviewing it in School Library Journal in June. Healer of the Water Monster. His release day was 2 days ago. So if our libraries can get that, awesome. But Amazon is already sold out. This is for your watching pleasure. And then at the end, I have again given you the Padlet to record your thoughts and questions after you process, after you've had a chance to go through all of that. So I am now going to try to stop sharing.
I'm with Dr. Keeling. We need to clap for Miss Stewart. So.
Thank you. I'm trying to make my
That's okay.
Thing big so I can stop. I'm sorry. I gotta, yeah, I'm gonna have to, there we go. Okay. Okay.
Stewart,
Yes. There I
thank
am.
you
I'm
so
so
much.
sorry I took so long.
No, this is, you know, it speaks to the fact that, speaking for myself, I've had so little education on
Yes.
Native American history that you just had so much to cover to get us ready, because it's hard to go to exhibits, for example, which I do from time to time. When you don't have a general context in your brain to fit things in, things get lost. And I appreciate so much the labor that you put into this, and all the resources, because I had gone through the slides ahead of time since you shared them, which I really appreciate. And I realized there were some references I missed in the notes. And so there's just so many resources and references. I really appreciate it.
You are so welcome. I'm just so appreciative that Orange County Schools is taking this huge step in listening. So one thing I do want to say is that I also did not grow up learning this information from public schools in Pennsylvania. I grew up right outside of Philly in Westchester. I didn't grow up learning this. This was not taught. This was not taught to my kids. This, I mean, you know, I don't know many districts who do this. All this information that I've presented to you, this has come from research on my tribe. This has come from research being on the State Advisory Council on Indian Education. This has come from personal historical curiosity and research and working with a group of people at Meredith University. So this is all, nobody has been taught all of this stuff. What I'm asking is why not? Yeah. So thank you all so much. Is there any other question I could answer? I know it's, ooh, good and golly, it's almost 11 o'clock. I'm so sorry. Is there any other question I can answer now,
Yeah,
or would you just like to do it on the Padlet?
I think we might need to, in general, do our follow-up questions afterwards, because I know we have a student coming in to speak in a couple minutes, and she has other, but I do want to give, does anyone want to take a minute to express their appreciation to Ms. Stewart? Because I know we would all like to do that, so I want to extend that opportunity.
Yeah, I definitely want to thank Ms. Stewart for taking the time. I know you've got a lot going on, and just to be able to, you know, put this together to allow us to start consuming. And I use the word start because there's a lot to unpack there. And, you know, just like Carrie said, I greatly appreciate the details and the links so we can look and expand on all the content. So I just wanted to thank you. I know it's a lot of work, but definitely appreciate all the thoughtfulness and how you've put it together to give us the context.
Oh yeah, and Mr. Atherton, I appreciate you so much. And you know, for you and all the board members, I have pretty high expectations of you all.
And you should.
Yeah, I have no doubt you'll meet them.
And I just exhausted.
I know, your brains must be exploding.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so thank you. That was a pretty amazing presentation. I have a million questions, but I have just a really basic one for you, and that's parents. What the experience of our schools are. We talked about kids and their experience. What about parents and how they engage and work with our schools? I just wondered how you think that we could do better on that.
I think the answer to that is very long and convoluted, and will also come with more discussions about how we determine who the parents are and what's the best methods to reach them and engage with them. And I think, Ms. Hauser, that is definitely a priority. So we will be talking about that. We will be discussing that, yes.
Hi, Kara. I'm sorry, I'm having camera issues, but I couldn't let this section in without just expressing my thanks. And I appreciate everything that you shared. I am processing, and every bit of it was good. I have the deck, but I'm taking pictures of certain slides as we went along. And I just can't thank you enough. This has really been wonderful. And you've given us a lot you've educated us today. You've enlightened us today. And I thank you so much.
Very welcome, Dr. Felder. Very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Stewart. We look forward. We know we're going to hear from you again in June, which gives us time to digest and consume and discuss among ourselves some of the recommendations that you've made in both presentations. And so I'm so glad we have another opportunity to talk about how to take this forward. So thank you so much for your time.
Sure, and don't forget to use the Padlet and put your thoughts on there. And Ms. Hauser, you might just want to write parent contact on the Padlet, and we'll know what that means. Thank you all.
Last round of applause, Ms. Stewart. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Bye. Take care. I see that we have an attendee, Mr. Jones, that I'd like you to promote, Ms. Kaylee Faison, and I'm going to take a quick minute to transition us, and then I'm going to pass it to Dr. Keeling to introduce her, since she knows Kaylee. But in this week's News of Orange, there's been a student piece, which did come out of that conversation. We had that piece about the News of Orange last fall, and the editor, is it Dale Edwards? I heard that right? Yeah, Dale Edwards. He has graciously made space for students, and so, which is such a wonderful opportunity to hear our student perspective. So this week on Wednesday, it was Kaylee Faison's piece, and the title is Racial Equity Forum Needed for Current Past Students, and it's an excellent article, and I want to applaud her for writing it, and I will pass to Dr. Keeling so she can introduce our student guest this morning.
Mr. Jones, can you promote Kaylee to a speaker?
I can't. It appears she is joined audio only, but I have unmuted her so she can speak.
Oh, okay. Let's test. Kaylee, can you hear us? Can we hear you?
Hi, yes, I can hear. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
So I really am going to be very short. I'm not even going to say much. I'm just going to pass the mic to Kaylee, and I just wanted to, though, congratulate her. And what she is going to speak to, it just falls in line with everything else that we're saying, and really being aware and listening to what our students are saying so that we can act. That's what I really liked about Kaylee's article. She told us, here's where the problems are, and then she said, and here's what needs to happen. So Kaylee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Keeling. Hi, everyone. I hope you all are having a great morning. I just wanted to hop on for a little bit today and sort of share my story, which I spoke to a little bit in the op-ed, and then also talk about the 2 solutions that I came up with that are also in my op-ed for some issues that I see and that I have seen in Orange County's dealing with equity issues in our school systems. So first, just a little background about me. I am a 3rd generation graduate of Orange County schools, actually Orange High School, if we want to get more specific. So my grandmother and my mother have both graduated from Orange County schools, as have many other members of my family. And so my grandmother graduated in 1972, which when we think of it, like students my age, when we think of it, we think that it's a really long time. But in retrospect, like it's really not that long of a span of time, right? And when I was growing up, my grandma's a storyteller. She's always been a storyteller. And so she would tell me stories of her schooling in Orange County. And I was fascinated because I was learning in the same buildings that she grew up learning in. And so I just wanted to absorb all the information and wisdom that she had to impart on me. And so I would listen to stories, and there were a good amount of good stories from her schooling experience, but also there was a large amount of stories that sort of just shook me to my core. She went to school in Orange County just at the bridge of when it was starting. Orange County had started the integration process and mixing both Black and white students in their classrooms. And so she had some very difficult experiences And I won't speak to those because I feel like that's her story to tell. But if we go back in history and think what experiences people have had, and the negative things that have happened in that realm is what she was dealing with. And so let's jump to my mom. She went to school 30, 40 years later, after my grandmother, and her story was more of a modern one, closer to what I experience on the daily. But my mother was, like we used to call it, like an AIG student. She was very smart, like top of her class, doing well in school. And so I can really relate to her because I am taking AP and honor level classes during high school. And while she was in school, while her stories were less severe than my grandmother, she still had to fight harder than I think she should have, to be in these classes and get the same level of education as her fellow white students. And so with that background and just knowing where I come from, and what I've heard about Orange County schools, I'm just going to start with the first point that I brought up in my op-ed, which is that Orange County schools, the first thing I want to preface with is that Orange County schools now, I think, is making amazing strides. I don't want to sit that aside and make it seem like it's not relevant, because it is. My sophomore year, I believe, yes, of high school is when I really started to see change. When Orange County schools brought in new people to help deal with the equity issues. So I do want to applaud Orange County schools and all of you on this call for being a part of that change, because I really am seeing change currently in our schooling system. So I want to say thank you. But on top of that, I wanted my op-ed, the real reason that I wrote it was to point out that it's taken a little too long. And so we are starting to have to play catch up for this long period of time in which no change was occurring. So because of that, I really want, and I hope that you guys will help me and aid me in this, to create an open forum. It can be online because of COVID, and I know we can't get in person, or it could be outside of the park. I want to create multiple open forums for students of color and their parents and their grandparents and whoever in their families have been a part of Orange County schools and maybe have some stories, either good ones of good things that Orange County schools did for them regarding equity and their education, and also those that are not so positive. And just have you guys on the meeting there, but have it really be a conversation led by the people of color who were affected by Orange County schools, just so that you can see many, many perspectives. Because I'm only one story, my grandmother, my mother, only one story. And so I think it would be really beneficial to see the difference between now and then, and the improvements that we are currently taking and the impact that it is having on students now versus their parents and their grandparents. Also to see things that occurred while students like mine, their mothers and grandparents were in school that are still happening to us, just so we can really pinpoint issues that need like immediate change. Because I feel like if we see like a continuous string of an equity issue between a group of people that has been going on for 30, 40 plus years, and we can actually hear the experiences, then we can begin to really pinpoint things that are at the top of the priority list and work our way down until we don't have such a large education gap. The second thing that I would like to talk about is when hiring teachers in Orange County schools, I think we have a large disparity between the number of minority students. Like in my op-ed, I said it's around 48% is the number that I found that was available to the public of minority and people of color students in Orange County schools. And that's a fairly large number. That's almost half of our whole school demographic. But in my however many years, I'm going to be a senior next year, so like 11 years of learning in Orange County schools, I think I can count on my 10 fingers the amount of teachers that I've had that are people of color. And I think that the influences that we see as students through our teachers really makes a difference going on into our future endeavors like college and jobs afterwards, on what we really think and see our potential limit being. So if we start in kindergarten and go all the way through 12th grade and we don't see anyone like us teaching us in a teaching position, then I feel like in our minds it's less tangible for students to see, oh, being a teacher is a tangible thing that I can achieve. And that's just one example. And I currently have a African American studies teacher, Mr. Xavier, and he has been really influential in just this past semester of making sure to be very encouraging and showing us the different paths that we can all achieve with no barriers. And I'm not saying that I have not had teachers that are not people of color that have not had that influential experience on me or that influential impact on me. I just believe that for some students, it's easier for them to see it and believe it than see it from someone who doesn't look like them and then try and make a connection with, excuse me, let me backtrack. Try and make a connection with someone who doesn't look like them and the dreams that they are trying to achieve. So I rambled a little bit. Sorry about that, but those are just two of the main issues that I think if Orange County schools can start to tackle, will make the current shift into trying to address equity issues a lot easier for not only the students who are dealing with the changes, but also you guys on the committees and the boards who are working every day to make equity issues less of a problem in Orange County schools. Thank you.
Kaylee, I just want to applaud you for your excellent writing and communication of ideas, both in writing and aloud this morning. I'm just really impressed by your ability to communicate all that you did. These are hard topics, and I just think you presented yourself so clearly and thoughtfully, and I really appreciate your message as well as your ideas, and particularly I love the idea of the Racial Equity Forum with students, current and past. I just think that's such an excellent idea. I know that we're working as a district on diverse hiring, but I just want to thank you. If you have time to stay on and listen to Dr. Keeling or Ms. Stowe or other members, please feel free to stay on. And I know that we will follow up with you. I also mentioned to our chair, Hillary McKenzie, who is unable to be here today, that we were hoping you were going to speak. So we will be following up with you, but I just wanted to say thank you so much.
I didn't know if I was frozen. My computer's going on and off. Kaylee, if you're still in here, yes, you are. So I just, again, wanted to congratulate you and to say thank you for what you've just raised and for the call to action. And I will just say this before I pass the mic to where we're moving next. One of the things that Ms. Stewart said was for us to make sure that we are looking at the connections, like making the analogies between what she just presented around Native Americans and other student groups that are going through and have gone through Orange County schools. So it's just like, for me, beautiful how things fall in line, because now here's Kaylee saying a perspective that in ways is similar, but it's a different group of students and families that have been affected. So I'll pause there before we move on.
Just to offer comment, and Kaylee, thank you so much for your comments I want to tell, board members we like to make ourselves feel good. So, and tell ourselves that we're working on some of this, especially the access to advanced classes, teacher diversity. Keep wondering if we're doing it fast enough because you've been at it for 3 generations. So sorry, and thank you for your patience with us. The thing that I keep hearing in this is how important it is to begin to unpack. We talk about equity all the time, but we don't unpack what that really means, how it affects our students, how it affects our families. And we are not, I think we need to do a better job getting it out of the boardroom and into our schools. And so I'll just leave it there. But thank you for the conversation.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you as well. I am so glad to see our students stepping up and speaking out and sharing their thoughts and ideas. Sometimes the adults don't have the right answers, and we should be open to that. And I agree, Bonnie, we've got to get it from these discussions to actual practice and see how we're doing. I mean, we just had recently the AIG discussion, and it was very eye-opening to, I think, all of us about where the gaps are and us going after and addressing that. And I believe that's one of the most common areas I hear myself of the access and the ability to be considered and disappointment and not knowing how it works. But there's a lot to unpack daily on this.
And if I could just chime in too and just say thank you so much, Kaylee, for sharing with us today. Certainly appreciate what you've shared, and that I realize that it was very courageous of you, and to speak your truth, and it's your truth. And not only did you speak your truth, but to Dr. Keeling's point, you also gave us a call of action. And so I can tell you that we take this work very seriously, and I'm glad that you are seeing change, but I also realize we have a long way to go. And I agree, Ms. Hauser, we need to take this out of the boardroom into schools, indeed, but even further into our community, and hear from people who have been impacted in a way that allows us to hear in a way that will lead to the kind of action that Kaylee's calling upon us to. Kaylee and others are calling upon us to take. So thank you again, Kaylee. We so appreciate you presenting today.
Okay, if there aren't other comments, then I appreciate Kayla making the time to speak to us on such short notice. She's in the middle of a competition today, and she carved out time. So she's a multi-talented young lady. She's carved out time to speak to us, which we really appreciate. And this on our agenda had been our time for community engagement. So this was a perfect use of that time. But Dr. Keeling and Ms. Doe, I'll let you, and Ms. Blefko, I'll let you take back the time.
Good morning, Ms. Doyle, Ms. Hauser, Mr. Atherton, my fellow colleagues. Todd, do you mind letting me share my screen? And Ms. Doyle mentioned that Ms. Blefko, Dr. Keelan are on the call as well. And I'm going to hopefully help get some time back for us. And part of what I'm getting ready to share will be shared at the board work session in more detail. So for that reason, I will keep it high level, but certainly appreciate any questions or feedback you may have. Let me switch real quickly. Okay, hope you're seeing my full screen. All right. So first, what is family engagement? And this is a perfect topic because this is what we were talking about. And it's a shared responsibility for student achievement, shared goals, relationships that are built on trust, authentic partnerships. And the data are clear that family engagement works, improves literacy, improves student grades, student attendance. It's connected to, as it was mentioned by Ms. Stewart earlier, it's connected to achieving high school graduation, college and career readiness beyond that. So we know that, but what is the barrier to family engagement? And the barrier is families and professionals, educational professionals in general, we're not trained in family engagement. My teacher prep program that I took and that new teachers are taking right now, there is not a class on family engagement. I'm a mom. I didn't get a handbook on how to be engaged with my school, how to engage with my son's teachers. So the barrier is that we're not trained. And it's hard because we're all part of a family. We were all born into a family. We interact as educators with families every day. And so we would assume and presume like, oh yeah, we know what that looks like, but we don't. Like we may see examples, but we're not trained in that. And I've got finished up my 3rd degree and there still is not a class on family engagement. So now you're probably like, well, why are you going to talk about this? So luckily for me, in 2006, I became involved with 21st CCLC, Century Community Learning Centers. And these are grants. It's a department or program through the U.S. Department of Ed. North Carolina has them, Virginia has them, all the states have them. Funding was set aside because we were not, federal funding, we were not engaging families. And it was well documented, again with the data, that we need to engage families if we want to see students achieve. And so as part of that work, I oversaw for the next 13 years all of non-school day programs. And the number-1 achievement factor that we looked at was family engagement. So I did train, well, in DC at the state level and with Karen Mapp. Karen Mapp wrote a book, I don't know, 15 years ago, Beyond the Bake Sale. Karen Mapp is also really instrumental in the dual capacity building framework, how we do this together. So I want to share a couple of things. And why does family engagement matter? Well, particularly for low-income families, limited English proficient students, they face multiple barriers. And what we're finding here is our minority families are facing some of the same barriers. And two things I'll share. In general, if a family, if someone wasn't successful, if a parent wasn't successful in school, so 20, 30 years ago, they weren't successful, the last place they want to go is down the same hall to the same office where they didn't experience success. And what we're hearing from our families, what our student speaker just shared, it's bigger and deeper than that, because we're not even talking about success. We're just talking about they didn't feel comfortable. And so asking them to come back for an event when they weren't comfortable when they were there is a concern that we have to address. So it all starts with trust. Bottom line, family engagement starts with trust. And I want to share what my colleagues and I have learned with family focus sessions, because this came up, this theme of trust comes up over and over again. And so again, how do we build that? We know what we need to do, but we need the tools of which to do that. So this is a quick update. We did hold several family focus groups, and this is the work of the Flamboyan Fellows. So that includes Dr. Dawson, Dr. Keeling, Ms. Blufko, and Mr. Farrington, and myself. And so the purpose initially is, how do we elevate the voices of the families that have been silenced? Like, let's start with who's not showing up to events. Let's start with who we're not hearing from, who we're not engaging. And so those were our Black African American families, Latino, Asian, underserved students. So then we're like, we need to have a conversation with them. But again, just reaching out, we're going to get the same folks that are interacting. We want to hear from the people that are interacting with us. And so part of this process was, how do we identify gateways? And so our gateways were essential partners. And we've referenced this group. We met in December. It was primarily faith-based African-American leaders. But as part of our invitation, we said, okay, invite a friend, invite a colleague. And so when we held our first meeting, it wasn't just African-American, it also included Hispanic leaders. And it's not just church leaders. Cedar Grove Community Center, the NC Cooperative Extension. It also includes, Orange County Housing Development employee. And then people that are just genuinely interested in this. And so as part of our conversation, and we meet with them monthly, these were the things that they identified for us. Lack of trust, 3 key factors in engaging families: language, representation, cultural visibility. And again, you've heard those themes from both of our speakers this morning. And don't just listen to us, but hear us. And as Dr. Keeling mentioned, action. Like, what are you going to do differently because you heard us? We want to see an action, something change. And Dr. Felder also participates in these meetings. Just want to mention that as well. So we came to Essential Partners and we're like, here are the questions. We're going to have focus groups. We're going to interview everyone. And this is where the Flamboyan Fellowship, in many instances, but this one particular was helpful, because they said, oh, no. You need to ask members of these subgroups, what do they want you to ask them? Don't go in with your agenda. Don't go in ready to fix it. You got to go in and listen. You got to ask questions. And so we shared this list of questions, and I think it might have been longer, to be honest. We shared this list of questions with our Essential Partners. And ultimately what they said was, you just need to ask one question. What has been your experience with Orange County schools? Don't come in with, okay, tell us everything wrong. Don't come in with, tell us everything right. Just what's your experience? And we do know that everyone hasn't had a bad experience. We believe most people have had good experiences, but we need to quantify that. And so this was the question. This was the question that my colleagues, as part of the fellowship, but it also as part of the work that we need to do, is listen to our families. Our first group, and this is obviously led by Ms. Blefko and our family liaisons, as they are bilingual and also identify as Hispanic, because again, to lead a session, you need to be able to identify with that group. And so this is a quote that was shared, and then some common themes. And these meetings did not just start with the Flamboyant Fellowship. Ms. Blefko has been holding these. This was not as a result of that. This was as a result of the relationships and building the trust that she and our team know we need to do with our families who have language barriers. And so here were the common themes that Ms. Blefko heard. Again, lack of trust. We need more bilingual staff, information in our language. We want to be part of the school community, and for schools to meet the needs of their students, of their children. Dr. Dawson led an Asian family focus group, and this did not just include a parent, but this included a high school student, which is where the 2 bubbles on the left came from. What could we have options, elective options with an Asian language, not just Spanish, French, but could we have other options? Hardly if any of the teachers look like me. And an interesting theme that came up here too was, sometimes the parents said, I feel like the teachers and principals are coming to us like, you're the expert, like you know how to do this. And no, like I don't know how to do this. I need your help because you're the educational expert. I'm the expert with my child, but I'm not an educational expert. And again, another theme, and this is a theme, and we will have a focus group centered around this. If our kids have special needs, we need help in how to navigate that. That's another family focus group that we must have. Again, a focus group, family focus group, is to share something in common. Right now we're addressing their culture and their race. And another piece was just, again, we're having to go outside of Orange County to connect with our communities, and we want to create that opportunity here. Mr. Farrington, Dr. Keeling, facilitated our Black African American family focus group. And I'm so excited to say They're having another one next week because they said at the end, let's keep doing this. We need this. So we're really excited about that. Again, lack of representation, lack of accountability for the district for equitable outcomes. We talked about microaggressions earlier with Dr. Keeling's opening activity, the need for action, and we're not heard. This was another quote. This is a white mother, but her children are biracial. And again, a theme around, I have one of my children has an IEP, and I don't know how to navigate this. And I feel like we're not connecting, that the school's not listening to me, they're not hearing me. And ultimately, again, with family engagement, the goal is for student success. So we as Orange County Schools want that. Families want that. It's just, how do we navigate the system? How do we navigate a relationship? And relationships are hard. I mean, relationships are hard, whether it's school, home, sister, brother, like you pick it. It's not, human interaction is the most complex of all things we do every day. And so it's, how do we set and put systems in place, best practices in place, where it's not just the teacher who gets it, they just happen to really understand family engagement, the principal who really gets it. We as a district have to really understand that. And so I want to talk about, student voice. Obviously, students are part of this. Definitely, we hear from them and their input, their feedback on what they need, and particularly our underserved students. So next steps for Flamboyan, we're going to continue the family focus groups. We are going to have white family focus groups, other subgroups. We started where we needed to start, who we need to hear from first, who we've not heard from enough. But we will have focus groups for everyone, because family engagement is necessary for every group. It is, because again, the goal is student success. And at the beginning and end of the day, while a teacher has great impact, when a child is deciding what they want to do with their future, when they're trying to make a decision about, do I go to college? 9 times out of 10, they ask their parent. That, because of many reasons, but that's who they go to. And so that's why family engagement is so important. And I want to share some of the things we're doing in that arena as well. We will continue to work with Flamboyan. Our work as a fellow, and there are 5 of us, and we're adding to that group. We have to, it's a two-year commitment. We have to determine a project to pursue. And so they are experts in family engagement. They have background, training, experience. They know what other districts across the country are doing, and we need that. So we're still working on what's the project. Does that mean that's all we do with family engagement? Of course not. The other piece is we get to leverage our other fellows. So we're one of 4 districts in the country that were selected. Yesterday, our liaisons, Ms. Blefko, met with our fellows in Yakima, Washington, where the majority of their district are Hispanic. And so that we had a meeting, like, let's hear what you're doing. Let's tell you what we're doing. So it's the networking and connecting with people that get family engagement, that want and have success, but also want to do better. So that's in a nutshell what we're doing with the Flamboyan Fellowship, high level. But then next steps for family engagement. So again, it's not just what is Flamboyan Fellowship doing. That's one piece. We're assessing family engagement with all of our schools and departments, and I'm gonna touch on all these really quickly, to develop 1 to 3 goals. I mentioned this, I think, 2 meetings ago, but we have a rubric for how are we engaging families, and I'll talk about that. We are implementing the dual capacity building framework. Again, you don't have to take a class or have a degree in family engagement, because it doesn't exist, but there are best practices, and the dual capacity building framework was designed by Karen Mapp in coordination with the U.S. Department of Education about 13 years ago, and she just updated it 2 years ago. We are identifying preferred communication options for all families. That was mentioned earlier by Ms. Stewart. We will know at the start of the school year, every single parent, how do you want to be communicated with, and in what instances. We're implementing a new communication tool. We had a pilot that we started in January and a soft launch. And this is part of the texting capabilities. We are training principals right now, and this will be a district shift. Not only will be able to text, but it's like the equivalent, like my first car was a Caprice Classic, and this is like the Escalade. You know, like there's so many buttons and bells and so much we can do where we can really drill down, like, oh, this parent didn't open the email, let's resend it. Like, how do we better use technology to better communicate and not over communicate? Like, 10 text messages a day is not a good thing. So again, the other piece is, what do you want to hear from us, and how do you want to hear from us? Do you want a text? Do you want an email? Do you not want emails? So we need to identify that. We have to identify preferred language for all families. We are increasing our translation interpretation services, thanks to Ms. Blefko and her team. And this is not just Spanish. We have other languages that we're doing this in. Super excited. Ms. Blefko is implementing an interpretation services for family requests. I'll send you this link, but it's the flip. Not, here's the information and here's how we want to translate it for you. I'm a parent and I speak Korean and I need to schedule a meeting. And so the family initiates that work. Typically it's the other way around. We need to talk to you, but we have a form for families to complete, and it's in 8 languages. Languages, when you see them written, are just beautiful. We will continue our Parent Academy sessions, and we have school directories, multiple languages. It's who do you call for what? And it has a picture of everyone, a picture of the principal, what the principal does, a picture of the nurse, a picture of the counselor, a picture of everyone to contact, what they look like, what they do, their email, their phone number. And those are awesome. So dual capacity building, I'm not going to go over this, but it's basically, again, the training for family engagement. So we have to identify what the challenge is, and that's really what we've been doing with our family focus groups, listening to them and then creating the conditions for us and them to be successful. So it's two-way. And then in some instances, this requires policy, but a lot of times it's just programs and best practices and an expectation that those things are done, not because an individual, that's their passion, but because it is the right thing to do. We have to engage families for student success. And then having family and staff capacity outcomes. So I had mentioned this earlier. And so what we will be doing with all of our principals and directors is having a conversation around these 7 tenets, because family engagement is much bigger than communication. Like, that's just one piece. And it's basically an assessment rubric. And what they do, I've got a copy of one here, but first of all, they identify who they are. So I'm a teacher, I'm a principal, I'm a parent, I'm a student, in some cases, and at the middle and high school level. And then they go through and assess. So am I doing a good job with participation, with families participating? Okay, yes, I am. Then I have to provide examples of that. What does that look like? And ultimately, there's always room to grow. And so the principals, their leadership teams will identify 1 to 3 areas on this rubric. Hey, I want to increase. I want to do better here. We can do better here. And so as part of our family engagement focus, we will work with them as a team to develop, like, okay, what do we need to put in place? And again, this is not just principals and school-based. This is our directors as well, and departments we oversee. I hate to single anyone out, because then I single someone out, but particularly with our students with special needs and those families, how are we ensuring that we're engaging you in that process, and creating opportunities for us to trust and work together? So this is one tool. Just want to do a quick reminder with our liaisons. While they are bilingual, their job description was set up, and this is their time distribution. So approximately 30% of their time is solely focused on translating and interpreting and working with our Hispanic families. But the other 70% is how to reach out to all families, how to collaborate with our counselors and social workers. And this is not just specific to Hispanic families. This is for all families, particularly underserved, particularly the families that aren't where the things that we traditionally do don't work, beyond the bake sale. So the things that we do that don't work, how do we reach out and engage those families? So this is, again, I shared this earlier, next steps for family engagement. If you have any questions, and I'm just trying to get back some of our time, Ms. Bluffco, Dr. Keeling, Dr. Dawson, Dr. Felder, I mean, everyone here is really involved in this work because this is a team effort. It's not a silo in any way, shape, or form. But if you have any questions or if any of my colleagues want to chime in, I am certainly welcome that, and I'm going to be quiet now.
Could I thank you, Ms. Stowe, for that great information? And if I could just add in, I do want to give credit because when we were doing the Asian focus group, we also had an 8th grader. So I just want to acknowledge that we had a high school and an 8th grade student. So it was really great to have them. I also want to share that I know, Ms. Stowe, you were saying that there isn't necessarily like a degree or a program, right, for family engagement. And so we've been looking for how can we support and provide professional development for our staff on family engagement. And we actually are looking into, it's a free Harvard edX course. It's their online platform. And actually it is Dr. Mapp who teaches this course. And it's an intro to family engagement that we're looking into, to introduction to family engagement and education that we're looking to provide and make accessible to all of our staff, and especially our family liaisons and our family engagement team. And it, you know, it focuses on helping us to learn why, right, that family engagement is so important and how it matters to the success of our students in schools. And they will, you know, this course would also help us to explore the research linking family engagement to better educational outcomes and speaking directly with researchers, educators, students, and families about best practices in this area. So we are, you know, continuing to find ways to support us in, you know, learning how to better understand the importance of family engagement, and also, you know, broadening our exposure and understanding of different activities that we can do to improve how we are engaging with our families, how we are listening, how we are hearing, and to determine how it is that we should act. And most importantly, how can we build the trust with our families? As we know, they provide access to their most precious gifts, and that's their children. And we do not take that work lightly. And it was, I want to say, one of our superintendent colleagues that say, you know, that it's our families you know, look to us to deliver the hopes and dreams for their children. And that's a very important responsibility that we take very seriously. So thank you, Ms. Stowe and Dr. Killing and Ms. Stewart, for all that you shared, and to our student speaker. It's important that we take this time. So thank you so much.
I want to thank you for this presentation, Ms. Stowe, and the whole team. I know there's so much work. This Bluffco and everyone is doing the Parent Academy sessions. I attended one earlier. I really need to go back to another one because they're really great to see all that happens there. It seems like we have ramped up in big ways our translation services, and that's so important. And I appreciate learning about the new communication tool. Could you speak to that briefly, Ms. Stowe? Because I know that was a question Ms. Hauser had about our texting capability and what that rollout was looking like.
Yes, absolutely. So we had originally planned to switch in January. And when we had several stop and start dates with like who's going back, plan B, plan A, it just was not the right time for our principals to have to go through training. And honestly, we can't lose our communication tool that we have right now. And it will require a complete shift where this one no longer works and this one does. And as I mentioned, it's an Escalade. And I don't mean that because it cost a lot, like it's just the upgrade. It was upgraded last fall, and we just didn't find it the right time during COVID to make the switch. So we will be making a wholesale switch this summer. We did pilot with Central Elementary. So she is using the texting feature. We did a soft launch the 1st of January where we reached out to all families, and because they have to opt into the texting feature, it's a FCC guideline. We can't, if I have your cell number, I can't just text you. You have to give me permission, or we could be found in violation of that. So we did a soft launch where we asked families to check that box. We had less than 10% just opt in. So we have work to do, and we're aware of that. And so that'll be part of our work this summer, is explaining this new communication, not system, but way that we communicate. This is work I've done elsewhere, but families opt in. And not only do they opt in, but they opt in, oh, if it's weather related, I want the grandma to know too, and here's her number, and I want you to text her. So it's a way for them, and also just to select again, I don't want to get text messages about the weekly memo. I'd rather have that email. So they tell us how we want you to communicate. The texting feature obviously is significant. And I also want to mention schools are using other means. I know for one in particular, New Hope uses Dojo a lot, and so it feels like texting because it's cell phone based primarily, but just schools and teachers do use different systems. This new tool will be at the district level and at the school level for them for us to use, and we'll make that switch likely the week of July 4th, because again, we want to pick a week that we don't have students or buses running, students in summer academy. So I hope that answers your question. If you have anything else specific, I'm happy to answer that.
But I know we are running out of time. I do have a lot of questions, but because we're running out of time, I'm glad we're talking about this at the work session, because I know there's more conversation. Mr. Atherton brought, Mr. Atherton has something he planned to share regarding a way that could look like, and it sounds a little bit similar to what you're describing. So in a minute, maybe he can put that up. But the only other comment I wanted to make, and there's so much work here with the focus groups and everything. I'm just thrilled to hear about these. But there was I feel compelled to note that there wasn't the notice of our Native American students. It had Black, African American, Latina, Asia, underserved. We can't do that. So we've got to add that in, right? And I'm going to pass Mr. Atherton.
Yeah, no, and I will just say that they were like affinity spaces. And so the members of the Flamboyan, we don't identify as Native American. That's why we couldn't hold the group. So one of our next steps was we have to bring Kara Stewart in and Miss Teresa Cunningham Brown and ask them, can they lead a family focus group? So yeah, for the purpose of the Flamboyan, that was why it was the members of the team who led those sessions.
Kara, can I just ask just a couple of quick questions? And I'm going to apologize because I was having a connection problem during most of Melanie's presentation. I got to see the slides. The first, these questions that you asked of the community groups, have you asked those same questions of our principals? Because they're the ones that are reaching out to families every day. And I keep hearing text, and you're right, Class Dojo is a popular way that at least our elementary schools are going out to families. Some also have created WhatsApp communities to reach out to primarily their Spanish-speaking families. And I don't know if we can move into that. They've also commented to me, a widespread popular comment is that the district communications are a little too complicated for many of our families, and we need to simplify them. Some suddenly we're going to add a whole new communication rather than building on the communications networks that are already in place with the families. And again, I wonder if we've heard what they have to say. And then I have this, because communication is ongoing, right? It's like, it's summer school. We had a lot of our families didn't know about summer school. So so some of our emails are just not getting to families at all. So just throw that out there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And yes, principals are absolutely part of this process. This district tool, it can be for basic information, but frankly, this is like for emergency. This is for like a bus issue, COVID, and that's where at 9 o'clock at night or on the weekend, WhatsApp and Dojo, those work for schools, but those don't work for a district. And yes, you're exactly right. I'm looking at the principals. What are we sending out, and how can we streamline it? How can we make it simple? And that will be part of the process for next year. Absolutely.
Okay, I'm passing to you, Will. We've got 10 minutes.
Okay. Can I get the ability to share? Oh, there it goes. So, so for context for this, one of the things, we talked about a couple of months ago, and Ms. Stowe was talking about it, was, how do we enable not just our families, but the actual community to be able to be informed about things that are going on in our school district, events of people that may not have kids in the school and they want to participate, whether it's a meeting, a community announcement, district events. And I realized when Carrie and I were talking, that a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? It's easier to just say, I'm kind of talking about this. And once we talked through it, and I just quickly, with PowerPoint skills, threw something together and said, here's what I'm talking about. And so what I wanted to do is just share it. And this is really based on my experience with the county and other groups I've dealt with. And it's really just to show an example. And Ms. Stowe, you may say, yep, this is actually similar to what we're already thinking. But this is, obviously just a rendition of what a form would be, right? That somebody would come in, regardless of if they're parents, students, whoever, anybody in the community could go in and say, hey, I want to know about board meetings, committee meetings, joint meetings, agenda, community announcements, closing, incremental weather, district events. And they could go in and say, here's my email, here's my phone, here's my cell phone. And also, I put in here, unsubscribe at any time. Here's our privacy policy, meaning we're not going to sell your information or share it with others. And then this other statement, yearly positive confirmation is required. This would obviously need to be a policy, but what it's saying is, hey, every year we don't want to have a list of bad cell phone numbers, bad texting, bad emails that we're sending out and it's just going nowhere. That we would send out a confirmation, hey, can you confirm you still would like to receive these? Say yes, respond yes to the text, email, whichever. And that way we have a process to actually clean up our records. You'll note too that I didn't put in this form the person's name or information, right? I didn't ask them, tell me who you are. I'm just saying, give me your information and we're going to share it. We're not concerned with your background, who you are, your name. And that way also it helps with privacy, not tagging that, because you do have a sensitivity when you start gathering personal information as well. The alternate to exactly what Melanie, you were talking about is a much easier form, which would be the same kind of thing, is instead of filling this out once and then going back and selecting phone and then submitting and then filling it out and selecting text separately, you could just consolidate it where people could go in and say, hey, I want a voice, a text, and email for this. I don't want it for this. Or they can specify in one single form and then of course fill it out. So a table view versus a form view to make it easier for people to fill out, because I know the most common concern I get from community members is the only way I can find out something's going on with the district is I have to go to your website, I have to click on board, I have to then go look, and you only posted a couple of days before, or something happens, and I have no way of knowing, and I don't have a way to participate because it's always after the fact. So anyway, this is, again, just trying to throw something out there as conceptual. It sounds like, Ms. Stowe, that y'all are on this path, which is very exciting. My only question is when?
Thanks for sharing this. So when is that this will be implemented for the next school year? That's what we're working on over the summer, and again for all families. And we did look into you had asked about, or someone had noted that a government uses a system. It's a great system, but it's only for government agencies, so we didn't qualify. So it's just a matter of if that's something that the district chooses to make an investment in.
Well, I can tell you if it fills this need, I personally, as an individual board member, would be interested in investing because it is something that to me would be very valuable in our efforts towards engagement. And I don't want to, imply it would replace anything else we're working on. I think this is in addition to being people allowed to, especially people outside our schools, right? And that could be, grandparents, it could be cousins, aunts, uncles, people that have been through the Orange County school system and likes to participate. One of the things I didn't explicitly put on here, but you could say volunteer, right? And now the district has a way to poll for volunteers and, include, here's the background checks. And, anyway, I think it's a great way for us to engage a different population that we haven't been able to engage with as well.
It's nice to see this convergence of ideas because we've talked about this a little bit off and on throughout the year. So was there anything else, Ms. Stowe, in what Will presented that is different? Like and I like the yearly thing because, also students graduate, move on. So all the elements that he pointed out, are those pretty much captured by what the district's working on?
Yes, it is. And the other piece with this new system is that families can go in at any time and update it, which is awesome. So we don't have to rely on the form once we get them in the system and walk them through that. And we will have parent academies on that as well.
Right, but just to reiterate that it's for broader community engagement, not just our family. So it's about getting it. It's kind of like opening the welcome mat up to Orange County schools and saying, we really want you to engage with us, and we don't want you to, we don't want you to have to figure out when our agendas get published and when things are happening. We're just going to let you want to know, we're just let you know, so you don't have to find us. Thank you so much for doing it.
There was one last topic that was mine, and I'm going to do it in 30 seconds, which is fine. We've had some conversation around virtual office hours, and I've talked to individual board members. I talked with our board chair, and personally, I'm okay with leaving it as, at this point, we're at the end of the year, letting whoever is the person for that month, if they want to adjust the way we're doing it. I know this month, May, is Bonnie, it's you and Brenda. Are there going to be virtual office hours? Do you have a date already? I haven't looked.
We haven't scheduled it yet. So I have to reach out to Brenda.
Okay, that's fine.
I have when we first started doing it, one of the things that was happening is we were just doing them casually when we felt that there was a need to open up the door. I think Will and I even took the time, we went out to Holy Family once to do it. So we knew we weren't getting to certain communities. So we said, let's go out there.
Let me just wrap up for a minute, Bonnie, because I was going to transition to that. So there's mixed feelings about continuing the virtual office hours through the summer. I'm fine if people want to do it. With Hillary, we talked about how sometimes interest drops off in June and July. And then there's the whole other idea of transitioning to in-person and when is the right time to do that. We've talked about, Bonnie, you and I have had conversations too. It tends to be like, we aren't really reaching a broad group with our virtual office hours, and there's definitely the need to do things in person. So two ideas I want to mention, and we don't really have time to discuss, but we can follow up separately as a board. One idea came up in here a month or two ago about having like almost a district maintained Google Doc of events that are already happening. So, and then, if Will and Bonnie are going to go stop by an event at Central, that you just note you're going. So we know, how many board members are showing up for different events. But my other question, I had an idea, and I want to put it out there, of what if, kind of similar to virtual office hours, we had a monthly almost like a rotation where, you know, if Will and Bonnie are September, they pick a location to go be in person in the community and let everyone else know. And then maybe October is my month with someone else, and we say, you know, I think we need to go to the Sportsplex this month, or we go back to Holy Family, or whatever it is. Is that worth investigating, where there's almost a rotation of an in-person event that board members seek a need for, which is kind of the opposite of the idea of a Google Doc of events that are already happening and we just go to. So we have like maybe a minute to discuss that.
I think we need both, right? Because one of them is the board doing something, right, to engage the community. And the other is, here are things that are going on that are going to happen whether we're there or not, and allowing us to have the opportunity to go to those events, or you know, more so being aware of it, you know, because I know a lot of times we hear after and we're like, oh, I would have loved to go to that if I'd have known about it. So I personally think it's two different things. One is how we engage, you know, and making sure we're accessible and available. And the other are, here are events that are going to happen. And, you know, what is individuals' interest in doing that or going to it? Because it's a personal choice. Because one thing's for sure, we all can't go to all events. It's just impossible, right? But at least knowing that there's the events available. And I do like the idea of, you know, as, you know, we're seeing the conditions of COVID change and vaccines and things, us, you know, going to where people are, I think are even more important, especially, you know, the virtual office hours was, you know, the starting point and the only method we had. But I think as we evolve, you know, making that available as well. I do think there is a place for the virtual office hours for people that don't have transportation, or, you know, they just don't have the ability to leave because of childcare and others. So there, you know, maybe there's a mix going forward of how we approach it, but I do think going in the community is a good idea.
I want to just add
Go ahead, Bonnie.
I just want to add a point that when you're the school board, everything gets done on our agenda. And I think if we're doing community engagement, it needs to be on their agenda. So I'm a little worried about structuring this monthly thing because it's at the board's convenience, as opposed to being responsive, because we heard that there's someone, the Cedar Grove community is upset about something we did. We need to show up when they want it. So I think we need to be a little bit more flexible in how we respond to the community. And in my opinion, it is the board's responsibility, every one of us, to be out in the community all the time. You know, so I'm a little worried about adding a structure to it, because I think that, not sure that helped us. I think it made us a little less responsive. And, you know, I think.
Well, okay, let me ask, thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate those points. Will, do you see taking this forward to the rest of the board in any particular way? Should we send out an email on this point, bring it to another board meeting to discuss? What should we do, since this might be our last community engagement meeting for the year?
I think we just ask Hillary to have it in as information item, and that way we could just have a discussion on it. But, you know, to Bonnie's point, I think there's the mixture of, you know, setting something up so people know they can engage us versus good news, bad news kind of meetings, right? And I think we have to be, to her point, flexible, that, hey, maybe we were thinking we're going to go to the Sportsplex, but there's an issue that's occurred and we go out. And I think we've got to have the hard conversations, positive and bad, you know, positive and negative news, you know. And a lot of times I get surprised when I'm out in the community and somebody's telling me about something that they're upset about, and, you know, you hadn't heard about, you know. And anyway, but I think an information and just us to have a quick discussion with the full board would make sense. I think an email, you know, I don't think an email would work, because I think other board members may have some ideas, and I wouldn't want to start an online meeting discussion on that. And I think it's a good quick discussion to hear ideas and thoughts about what that would look like and how we would manage it.
Okay, that's great. I'm happy with that, and I'm glad we got through all of these, pretty much all of our topics. And we're a couple minutes after 12, so we really do need to end. So I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, and I'll second that. And all in favor?
Aye.
And thanks so much, everyone. This was just a really dense, meaty meeting. I feel like there were so many valuable topics. So just thank everyone for being here. I appreciate you. See you all later.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.